This is Michael Somoroff. He's going to speak to us about some stuff. He's going to take questions. It's going to be interactive. And if I say, sometimes the more you say, the worse it is. So I'm just going to shut up. And I'm going to let Michael go ahead.
It's stuff.
Right.
It's stuff. It's supposed to be stuff.
I like that introduction. The more you say, the worse it is. And now this guy's going to talk.
Exactly.
Right. Well,
don't worry, this is a judgmental crowd anyhow.
It's cool. I want to thank Itzhak and all of you for the invitation. And I didn't prepare anything. And I didn't look at what was sort of put out there in terms of who I'm supposed to be and what it is I have to say. So I hope that I'm going to say something meaningful for all of you. I do want to begin by saying that I'm very impressed by all of you from what little taste I've had of you.
Well, you don't know us. We never seen you before. You've never seen us before.
Well, I see you, and what I see, I'm very impressed by.
You're easy to impress.
Yeah. Not really, because it's very clear to me that it's a very, very interesting group of people, and so I hope that I can provide some sort of service this evening, and that's the first thing I want to say.
What are you going to talk about, and what is your background?
I'll give you a moment. And then,
to get an idea what this is about.
So I'm a film director and an artist by profession, and I guess I do public installation work. I work in video, sculpture, and photography. And I'm born and raised in New York. I lived in Europe for many years. I have a family that I live with downtown. And my mother was a very famous fashion model. My father was a very famous photographer. And I grew up in my early years really at the height of the world of glamour at that time. In the 50s, the magazine world was sort of tantamount to what the television and film world has become in many respects today. And I grew up right in the middle of that world. And certainly didn't grow up with any religious training. My great-grandfather was a rabbi, and my grandfather was a rabbi. My family's from Russia. They traveled to Philadelphia. My earliest memories are of Philadelphia. South Philly, we had a delicatessen. My great-grandfather had a pretty large community that he was a teacher to. My father left all of that behind and never looked back, really. So I wasn't bar mitzvahed. I didn't grow up in an observant home. Matter of fact, my idea of being Jewish pretty much was we did Pesach, we lit some candles at Hanukkah, and as I grew older, the Pesach service became ever more abbreviated until it was about 2 sentences, and then we moved on. I started my own career as a magazine photographer very young. I worked for virtually every major magazine on both sides of the Atlantic, and eventually I was invited to go to Paris to work for Condé Nast, where I was a contract photographer for Vogue for 12 years. And I went to Paris, and then I ended up in Hamburg, Germany, and sort of traveling between different cities. And I was very serious about being an artist. And in my mind, art had something to do with expressing truth. And so that immediately put me into a bit of a pickle, because that meant that I had to know something about the truth. And that began my inquiry into philosophy and religion. And early in the 80s, I befriended a man named Joachim Koch, who at that time was a pretty celebrated German postmodernist. And we became very good friends, and I did the illustrations for his books. And one day he said to me, you know, Somoroff, you'd be very interested, actually, in the Kabbalah. This is really something you should look into, because I think it's something you would really connect with. And at that time, it wasn't, especially for somebody that, you know, wasn't coming from a religious background, there was no serious way, really, to get any exposure to the Kabbalah. I tried my best and looked around, and didn't really work out very well. And I wasn't really that concerned with it. I was really studying more philosophy at the time. One thing led to another, and my career progressed, and I was offered the opportunity to direct films in Hollywood. And I was invited to come back from Europe by Columbia Pictures, which is something that I did. And shortly after my arrival back in the States, I got involved with Judaism in a way that I hadn't been exposed to. And until that time, I had recognized in my own life that I had become very sensitive to coincidences, patterns of coincidences. And it occurred to me at one point that there were too many coincidences for them to be coincidental, so something must have been going on inside of me that I was seeing and perceiving some patterns. And that led me to becoming much more serious about trying to understand really what the essential character of life was, which, you know, by that time I'd read just enough of about everything I could get my hands on to understand that I didn't understand anything. And I fell into, which is, you know, I won't digress there, but I fell into an exploration of Judaism. And one thing led to another, and I led a modern Orthodox life for many years. And I had a lot of, huh?
You poor soul.
And I had, yeah, and I would, you know, and I would, I thought that was very interesting.
How old were you?
You know, I was my early 30s, mid-30s. And I thought that was very interesting, and I really tried very hard to be halakhically wholesome. And that didn't work out very well. And I would have questions very often, you know. And I would ask questions, and I would get answers like, well, you know, you do this because it says so. And I would, or, you know, we're the Jewish people, the people that we will do, and then we'll understand. And things like that would right, people that would struck me at the time as being absurd. Yeah. And so this went on for a while, and then that led me to, well, you know, there's another way to look at this, which is more Kabbalistically, and Kabbalistically got my attention because this friend of mine had mentioned it. And the next thing I knew, I was studying then at 770, and I was studying Tanya, and that went on for a number of years. And then I decided, and I was pretty successful at this period, and I would get routinely hustled for money pretty much everywhere I went, and that made an impression on me. And then finally, sort of,
meaning negative impression.
it made an impression.
Who hustled you for money, and how did you get to 770?
Which one first?
Whichever one.
Well, people would, you know, I would contribute, you know, to different charities, and sort of innocently, and then I'd be on a list, and I'd get hustled routinely. And how I got to 770 was, again, another person led me there, you know. And this went on for a while. And then finally, sort of, it all came to a critical mass. And the critical mass was that I had all these questions that I couldn't get answers to that seemed very fundamental to me. Like, why are we doing this? Or, like, what does that mean? You really believe that? I mean, C's part, I mean, can you explain that to me? What's happening here? And I really couldn't get answers, and I would keep getting answers like, well, we do it because it says so, and, you know, whatever it says, and that wasn't very satisfying to me. And that sort of combined with the hustle led me to finally say, you know, I don't know, this isn't working for me at all, actually. And I don't know, this seems to be, there's certainly nothing spiritual about this per se. So I think that I'm not going to have anything to do with this anymore, pretty much.
How long did this phase last?
That I didn't have anything to do with it?
No, the 770 phase.
A few years. There was a period of about 10 or 12 years I was really experimenting with being an observant Jew on many levels. And then I decided that it was really all nonsense. And I had, you know, learned quite a bit at that point. And so that was a problem for me, actually, because I knew enough for it to be annoying. So I decided that I would actively do everything in my power to forget everything that I had learned, and that it was all nonsense, and I was going to go back to my original aspirations of making a lot of money, being successful, retiring early, and reading a lot, and hanging out and listening to jazz. Is kind of where my head was at. Now, all of this is sort of a prelude for what I thought I might share with you this evening. So at that time, cell phones were just coming around. And my agent said to me, and he wanted me to get a cell phone very badly. He's a control freak. He wanted to be able to get in touch with me at all times. And I wanted very much for him not to be able to get in touch with me at all times. So there was a long sort of gestation period of an argument of why I needed to have a cell phone and why I thought I didn't need to have one. And finally, as I was going off to holiday, he stuck one in my hand and said, you have to have this cell phone or you're fired. And learn how to use it by the time you get back. So that was pretty compelling, because at that time I really needed him and he was doing a good job. So I went up to Cape Cod and I was sitting there. And I thought, well, I was on the beach. And I thought, well, you know, you should really learn how to use this cell phone. And I don't know if any of you have had an experience like this. You know, it's probably nothing, but in the moment that I turned the cell phone on, it rang. And I had had enough of those kinds of experiences in my life that I was very convinced that when things like that happened, that there was some pattern of meaning there that I could look deeper into. And so it definitely made an impression on me.
Was it God calling?
No, actually it was a friend of mine calling, and he said to me, listen, Michael, there's a rabbi here from Israel, and he'd like to meet you. And I said, you know, excuse me, I think the line isn't working, you know. You say a rabbi? I don't do that anymore, you know. And he said,
because in between the time the guy gave you the phone, he wasn't giving this other guy your number.
Yes.
Some other people. And he'd probably been trying.
So I said, no, I don't do rabbis anymore. I'm not into that. And he said, no, this rabbi is really different. Yeah, I know. He's got a new hustle that I haven't heard, you know. He said, no, this is really different. He'd really like to meet you. I said, well, you know, that's nice. But not only do I not do that, but I'm not in New York right now. I'm on the beach. It's really cool. There's a lot of people, you know, really nice people here. And I'm trying to just trying to figure out how to work the telephone so I don't get fired. And I'm not around, you know, so I can't really make it, you know. He said, no, but this Thursday, I said, I don't know, we're not communicating well here. I'm not here, can't really do it. Actually not really interested at all, you know. So he was very disappointed, and I learned how to push end, and the phone call ended. And as I pushed end, it rang again. And I thought, well, this is really interesting. Is this like does this come with the phone, or is this part of the service? And it was my producer. And my producer said to me, listen, Michael, I know that you just got there on holiday. I did. I had traveled on Shabbat because I would purposely do things like that. So I would unlearn Shabbat. And was my first Sunday there, and I was lying on the beach. It was in the morning. He said, listen, I know you just started your holiday, and I hate to screw it up, but this has something to do with why we gave you a phone. You got to come back. Okay. He said, yeah, on Thursday, you got to be back for this meeting. Thursday. Okay, that's fine. So I pushed end, and now I dialed the phone, because I had to learn how to do the dialing part too. And I called back the friend that had called me, and I said, listen, I'll meet the rabbi. And he said to me, really? What happened? You changed your mind? I said, yeah. He said, you see, he's an important. I said, no, that's not why I changed my mind. I changed my mind because coincidentally, I have to come back, and it's too much of a coincidence for it to be a coincidence, so I'm interested to see who this guy is, that somehow he's able to do that. So I came back to New York, and I had my meeting. And everything was cool. And, my office is all the way at the bottom end of Manhattan. And where the rabbi that I didn't want to meet was all the way at the top of Manhattan. And I came out of my meeting sort of preparing to go meet the rabbi I didn't want to meet. And it started to rain. And I never saw a rain like this. And so I immediately went back into my office and asked my assistant to call a car service, and of course everybody else was calling them because of the rain, and then I couldn't get a taxi, and couldn't get this, couldn't get that. Subways were flooded and all. So basically the only way that I could get to meet him was if I would start walking, okay? And that was indicative to me of something as well. So begrudgingly I started to walk to the Upper West Side, way uptown, actually near Columbia, and in the pouring rain. So you have to imagine this scene. My holiday has been disrupted. I have a cell phone that I didn't want to have, and I have agreed to go meet a rabbi I don't want to meet.
What about
In
buses?
the pouring, no, the buses were filled up. I couldn't get there, and by the time I arrived at the hotel where the rabbi was, I had looked like I had jumped into a swimming pool with my clothing on, and I was not a happy camper. And I was ushered, and he's a Hasid, and I was ushered into a room, and there was a whole, Hasidim culture thing happening there.
Put your yarmulke on it.
I didn't have a yarmulke. I was really wet, though. I mean, I was soaked to the bone, boy. It was amazing how wet I was. And I sat down, and everybody pretty much ignored me, and that struck me as being highly spiritual. And so that made me that sort of reinforced my original resentment. And then finally, after about an hour or so, I was ushered into the room, and there was this rabbi sitting there. And he immediately jumped up and ran to the bathroom, and then rushed back with towels and started to pat me with towels. And I thought, well, that's impressive, Here we are with 60 or 70 people, and somebody noticed that I was soaking wet. So I thought that, that made an impression. And I thanked him for that. And we sat down, and I always love to tell this part of the story. Because, by the way, he was, in his community, from what I understood at the time, he was considered to be a serious big deal. His name is Rabbi Avraham Brandwein. He's from Jerusalem.
Avraham Barrel wine?
Brandwein.
Brandwine?
and he's the son of the secretary to the Baal Salam, Rabbi Yehuda Ausschlag, who translated the entire Zohar from Aramaic to Hebrew. So I had at the time no understanding what any of that meant, but it was clear that he was considered a pretty big deal. I was just soaking wet. So we were sitting there.
How did he know about you?
I don't know. I guess some friends, or I don't know. So I said to him, because I just wanted to, clear the air. I said to him, listen. This is the first thing I said to him was, listen, I just want you to know, I'm not giving you any money. That was the first thing I said to him. First thing. And then I said, and by the way, I don't want to learn nothing. And I'm not going to be a student, and I'm not going to keep kosher, and I have no interest whatsoever on Shabbat. I would never give up my Saturdays. And matter of fact, I told him, when we're done, in light of my feeling like I belong in the sea, because I'm that wet, I'm going to have a huge lobster dinner in celebration of that I got through this day. And he said, that's fine. And, you have to imagine, I'm sitting there now with him at this table, and we're alone now in the room, and I'm thinking, this is really something. Here I am. I absolutely don't want to be here under any circumstances. What am I doing here? And it was one of the longest pregnant pauses of my life. And after about 5 minutes, he said to me, would you like a cup of tea? Thought this is a good sign. We got the towels and the tea. I said, sure. And he poured me a cup of tea, and we sat there silently. And I started to think about how absurd, it was really like a scene out of a movie. And I thought to myself, this is really absurd, And then I started thinking about, part of what made it so absurd was that I had a whole history of like going to 770 and going to synagogues and asking questions and being ignored and not getting answers. And I thought, here I am again. And one of the things that I had been told very often is that, the way you find your teacher is to ask a question and see what comes back, what the answer is. And so clearly I had never found my teacher because I'd asked the most simple questions in the world and nothing came back so that made any sense to me. So I thought, listen, you're sitting here anyway. You're soaking wet. You went through a great amount of trouble to get here. So maybe that's meaningful. You're going to leave in a few minutes. You've already told the guy you're not giving him any money and you don't want to learn from him. So why don't you at least pass the time and ask him a question? So I did. And he gave me the most stunningly simple and beautiful answer to a question that nobody I had met until then had been able to answer. And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. So I said to him, listen, because I was really impressed with the answer, and I said to him, listen, I don't want to share that, but it was impressive. And I said to him, listen, I'll tell you what.
You're not going to tell us the question and the answer?
No. But I said to him, I'll tell you what. What we could do is we could be friends. We could be friends. And he said, that's good. Friends is good. And so we started a friendship that went about 2 years. And he'd come into town and call me up, and we'd go for a Coke or something. And I'd call him occasionally, see how he was doing, And because I thought this was, this is pretty cool. Because I have this friend, everybody worships him like a king, but we're just friends, Now, this person, as I said, is the son of the secretary to the Baal Salam. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with who the Baal Salam was, He translated, as I said, the entire Zohar from Aramaic to Hebrew. He wrote a commentary called the Sulam. And he also edited the Eitz Hayim by the Ari and ordered it and made it actually understandable. So it could be argued effectively that much of what we're able to study today that is part of the area of Kabbalah is very much the result of the efforts of the Baal Salam. Not only that, but he published hundreds of articles giving commentary on the Torah and how it relates actually to everyday life, in particular, problems associated with philosophy, socioeconomics, and economy. And he published those articles in the newspaper. He was pretty much shunned by most of his Hasidic community, and he was pretty much shunned by the popular community, the secular community. He had a few friends. He had this one friend, Ben Gurion, who he gave a lot of advice to, who was trying to set up a country at the time. And
This is the grandfather of the rabbi that you're...
no, this is the father, right. So, as I learned more about who this rabbi was, I became more aware of, that he had access to somebody. It struck me as somebody who really had made a serious contribution to culture. And that became very interesting for me. And what was most interesting was that this rabbi, Rav Bramwine, who I had become friendly with, I had never met a person who was more in control of their ego in my entire life. There was never a moment in all the time that I knew him where he wasn't in control of his own selfishness. And the result was that he was the most endlessly compassionate being I had ever come in contact with. And after 2 or 3 years of being around that really made a very deep impression on me, to the extent that I thought, this is really a human being. This is really a humane being. Now, how do you do that? How do you get to do that? And that became an interesting project. How could I become a humane being? How could I reach a place where I could actually bridle my own egotism? And one day we were together. So he had, by this point, into it, he had a serious focus from me coming. I still wasn't interested in learning. And one day he said to me, it's really nice how you talk to people, Michael. He said, it's nice. You're very entertaining. He said, you use that in your work? I said, yeah, when you're directing films, you got to sort of connect with people. He said, yeah, it's nice. He said, you're like a radio. And I said, well, thank you, Prof. I'm not sure that's a compliment. I haven't been called a radio before, but he said, yeah, the thing about a radio is it's not the hardware. It's the programming. He said, wow, what kind of radio you'd be with good programming. And he left it at that. And shortly after, I said to him, listen, what do you mean good programming? He said, yeah, you don't want to learn, but you've been learning anyway. He said, so. I thought about that, and I thought, well, okay. You know what? I'd like to learn. What I'd like to learn, and I told him, what I'd like to learn is how to be a human being. Because that's what had caught my attention. And so we began to learn together. And the first thing that I want to share with you tonight is that this was the single most important event of my life, meeting this man and learning what I have learned, without any doubt. And it is absolutely, I am the last guy to say that. I was so against this, you can't even imagine. I mean, I came militantly against this. And today, I am very, very involved with this. And I wanted to share that with you because something must have happened to me. And something did happen to me. The love that I experienced, the non-judgment that I experienced, the way into a truth that was so clearly for all people and touched all people was amazing. And the more I learned Baal Salam and the more Kabbalah I learned, the deeper it touched me and the more it transformed me. And today it's the center of all of my waking hours. And, you know, it was interesting, and I'm saying that to you because I really want you to know that I'm not a guy, I'm well-read, I consider myself, you know, to have lived a very sophisticated life. And I'm not a guy who's given over to nonsense. I don't believe hearsay. I believe in strong examination of each situation. I believe in knowledge. I'm not superstitious. I don't have any particular psychological problems that I know of that require for me to make leaps of faith into the world of pure imagination and fantasy. So the fact that I have become somebody that is completely committed now to learning what I've been learning is really actually quite remarkable to me. And I wanted to share a little bit with you this evening about some basic things that I've learned that really made a huge difference for me. So one day I was with the Rav and he said to me, you know what Torah means? It means teaching. He said, you know what kind of teaching it is? It's spiritual teaching. He said, you know what spiritual means? It means inner. He said, so first of all, you should know that the Torah, it's a teaching for one's inner development. And since everybody has an inside, it's for everybody. I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. He said, yeah. And, you know, there's a large conversation about, you know, that the whole thing centers around God. He said, so you gotta figure out what God is. And he just left it sort of at that. And at that time, we were learning, and I have a loft downtown, and we were learning one evening in my loft, and he came and he said to me, you know, if we're going to spend time learning, we should decide, you know, discern whether or not what we're learning is the truth or not. Because why would we want to spend a lot of time learning something that's not true?
What were you learning?
You know? I was learning Baal Salam.
With this Rabbi Brandwein.
Yes.
You doing a translation of the Zohar then?
Well, there are many articles. At that time, I was learning an article called Introduction to the Zohar, which is a basic overview on the essential components of the inner Torah, or the Kabbalah.
And you connected with that?
Completely. And he said to me, does truth exist? And what is it? So, you know, I know this is an important conversation in philosophy, and I thought a long time, and of course I was trying desperately to come up with a good answer. And I said, well, everybody has their own truth. You know, I took the safe way. And he said, perfect, perfect. Now let's start learning. And it was wonderful. We learned in my loft on Prince Street, and we learned till about 6 or 7 in the morning. And we were having tea in the morning. The sun was coming, through the windows, and we finished the tea, and I live on the first floor, and we went out onto the landing, and he started to walk down the stairs, and he said, and by the way, he just sort of looked up, and he said, by the way, Michael, and then there's truth, to be, being, and he left. And later on, we learned a very specific definition of truth, which was that the truth is that which can be seen from any perspective at any point in time, and it doesn't change. It's always the same. So, of course, my definition of subjective truth was a little problematic according to that definition, because not only is my truth changing every split second, but obviously a subjective truth is different in terms of everybody's eyes. And yet what I was being taught was that there was an eternal component to the truth. So the question became, what, if anything, in our experience remains the same? And the answer is, according to what I learned, is that only being fulfills that definition. Meaning that being as the all-inclusive fact within which all things unfold. Being itself is always being. And so it doesn't change. And it includes everything. Because obviously anything that isn't is included within it and is something. More than that, it's the collective sum total of everyone's experience. So being is the byproduct of a social architecture. And so it is completely predicated upon sharing. So this was very interesting when I was told that, by the way, that definition of truth is a good starting point for approaching the concept of God.
Why being and not becoming?
I think becoming would be an extension of it. Becoming would be an expression of being.
Why not the reverse? Why not being itself is an extension of becoming? Why the priority you take?
Well, I think that anything that is becoming or becoming itself, already is by definition a part of being as a container or environment within which that unfolding must take place.
Is that something you deduced, or is it simply an assumption?
I don't think it's important.
Okay.
Because I think that either way,
Okay.
the all-inclusiveness of, all you're talking about there, which I, by the way, think is a good point and important, is the subjective experience of what I'm alluding to as a universal condition. And that's where the problem begins, actually, in the conversation, and I'm aware of that, which is that any conversation that we can have about infinity is not a conversation about infinity because there's no name that we can give it. What I'm talking about actually includes the process of becoming, absolutely. And that process of becoming, its intersection point would be oneself. And that was what was so interesting about the conversation, actually, was that there was a component of Godding that the absolutely essential participant in it was us. And that without it, there was no reality and was no condition and was no God. And that was very interesting for me at the time. And this became really the starting point of the architecture of what I learned was Kabbalah. Because the starting point was that there is a basic condition that's an all-inclusive fact. And we can't name it, and we can't really discuss it because it's infinity, because it's all-inclusive. Infinity meaning not that we can go on counting it forever, but that everything can happen within it on a holographic scale endlessly. It is without end. So we have this whole, or this singularity, this being, this isness. And then, of course, we only have that as long as we have an experiencer. And we're the experiencer. And this is exactly, and most people are not aware of this, this is one of the most fundamental ideas in Torah. The idea that there is a critical relationship between the creator, or being, and the created beings. And that actually they're two sides of one coin that define one another. As a matter of fact, the Baal Salam says that in order to understand Torah properly, one has to do away with any metaphysics whatsoever, and that every aspect of Torah should be empirically verifiable. So that immediately got my attention after all those years of hearing because it says so, or sea-splitting, and so on and so forth. Another thing that was brought to my attention very early in the game was that the Baal Salam explains that because the Torah is a teaching for one's inner development, it's in a specific inner language. And the language is actually very specific. It's called the language of the root and the branch. And I learned from my teacher that without an understanding of the language of the root and the branch, you cannot understand Torah. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says very clearly that the Torah that most people think is the Torah is only the garment of the Torah. And that if you are only familiar with the garment of the Torah, that you're a dangerous person and you should stop learning it. So this was for me very interesting. Because basically what I had been told at the time was that you have this condition of the self. Now we all have a self. And that this condition of the self obviously keeps one from ever being able to know the truth. Because the definition of truth I was given was being, or the all-inclusive fact. And obviously, I as an individual, because I'm limited, cannot be in a situation where I can be experiencing the all-inclusive fact. Because I would have to experience every being's emotion, thought, in past, present, and future all at once to be able to do that. And obviously I cannot do that because I'm limited. But basically, it meant that in order to have an experience of the singularity, of being, of God, there had to be a receiver, which was me and you. And in order for there to be a receiver, there had to be a giver. And that the condition, the basic existential condition, is a condition of the part and the whole. And when we talk about the self, and when we talk about the ego, what we're really talking about is the partness of the whole. The Baal Salam explains it by saying that the ego is like an instrument that separates a stone from a mountain. And that the minute you put the stone back on the mountain, it becomes part of the mountain. But the ego, or the selfness, becomes the basis of our experience in the world, so that our syntax for experiencing the world is selfness. And what we see in the world actually is the self. Because, and another part of what I learned that at the time was very surprising to me was the idea that actually the world outside of myself is actually the world inside myself. Because the only thing that I'm actually experiencing when I experience the material, physical world is a projection of what's going on inside of me. And this is actually makes a lot of sense, because although I'm looking at all of you, I'm not really seeing any of you. What I'm seeing is an egoic concept of you and people that I learned. What I'm actually experiencing is an energetic interaction off of my electro-neurological system that I'm turning into concepts again because of that egoic training. The fact of the matter is that even on a physical level, if we could see this situation in a more basic dimension, there would be no differentiation between any of us or what we consider to be the empty space, which would be full space. And if we would go deep enough into a subatomic realm, most of what would seem to be a particle would be nothing but empty space until we continue and finally reach nothing. And this is, by the way, mainstream science. So it was very interesting to me to discover that what I was learning as the basic precepts of Torah was in complete agreement with the basic science of quantum mechanics. So basically there was a situation then where in order for God to exist in the world, there had to be a recognizer of godliness or of being itself. And that was us. And that was the secret behind the idea of our partnership with God, according to the teaching. And that we have a condition existentially where you have the part and the whole. So one of the great innovations of the Baal Salam is to explain in his commentary on the texts of the Ari, he calls this desire. And he explains that every individual is the sum total of their desires, actually, and that is all. And the reason that that is our essential condition is because what we ultimately desire is the experience of fulfillment, all of us. Now, to one person that may be a mate, to another person that may be money, another person that may be, honor. But the truth of it is that the compulsion to feel whole is what's at the core of every activity. As a matter of fact, if it weren't for our desires, we would never even get out of bed, actually. We get up in the morning to chase our desires, and what we ultimately desire is a sense of wholeness. That's also accepted today by mainstream psychology. Obviously, there is no greater sense of wholeness than to be connected with the whole, which is being, which is impossible. By the way, because each of us is an individual. It's that individualness, that limitedness, that actually fills us with a sense of desire. Because desire is nothing but our own sensation of lack. Because we only desire what we don't have. So actually, our entire lives of getting up and doing whatever it is we do, every action we take, and by the way, according to the Torah, that is the definition of action, is the running after the fulfillment of desire, which is a result of our own sensation of ourself or limit. Our limitedness expresses itself as a lack that we are constantly trying to overcome because our source is being, which is an all-inclusive fact which is just another way of naming God. Now, this was really quite intriguing to me, to learn this, because not only did it make enormous sense suddenly, but it all started to fall into place. Because you see, the problem with the existential predicament that I've just presented to you is that it guarantees that you will never be happy. Because no matter how much fulfillment you experience, since it's based on an expression of lack, and that's your essence, you will always want more, because you're limited. And that's pretty much the way the world operates, and the reason why there's so much unhappiness. Because people are actually attached to their desires, which is an expression of their lack, and that's the prison, the egoic prison that they're stuck in, and remain so for most of their lives. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I, of course, then wanted to know how to get out of that jam, because that's kind of a bitch, to know that all of my desires and all of my sense of fulfillment are destined to be short-circuited by my own egotism, and that the result will be that I will never be happy. Now, I, for one, am very interested in finding a place of happiness. So I began to look more closely at that, and it was very interesting that actually the whole point of the teaching was to solve this problem. So that was another thing that I discovered. A lot of people who have studied Torah or know about Torah didn't know. And this is the secret behind Rabbi Akiva's statement that the guiding principle of the Torah is to love your fellow as yourself. You see? Because actually, this situation of the ego or the self in relation to being and the singularity and God has a few nuances to it that are worth mentioning. One day I was sitting with the Rav and he said to me, yeah, it's nice, Michael, to be close together. Okay, I think it's nice. He said, so it's easy to understand what closeness is in the physical dimension, because in time and space, it's easy. But what is closeness in a spiritual dimension? Now, by the way, I always find it very interesting when we get into a conversation about spirituality. I mean, I would like to point out that another fantastic source of misery is the fact that we have constructed a culture where we basically ignore the inner needs of people. And the only thing we believe is real is if we can measure it and count it. Okay? So that's a problem, and I always find it very ironic, because if you ask most people, so what matters? They'll tell you, well, love, death, having a friend. And these are all spiritual things, interestingly. They're not physical world things. And yet we have a whole world where we tell ourselves every day, well, the things that are real are the things that I need physical evidence for. Where actually, at the same time, what we're saying is actually the things that are real are the things that are spiritual. The things that actually are inside of me. So that was very interesting for me also to see that here was a wisdom that was solely focused on how I work with that inner experience. And that situation was then that I began to look at everything in life in terms of spiritual first. Because I began to understand that what was going on inside of me was actually what I was experiencing outside of me. Literally. That I had learned it, had a prejudice towards it, had a cultural syntax about it, had a selfish desire that I was expressing. It wasn't objective at all, what I was experiencing in terms of the world. As a matter of fact, it is developed so today that I don't even think it's real, what I see with my very eyes. I have tremendous skepticism about what I see and sense with my senses. Because actually, they're very limited. I mean, we know that there are all kinds of light that we can't see, and yet in our daily lives we dismiss that fact on a moment-to-moment basis and construct an entire worldview based on nonsense, basically. So the Rav said to me, so what is closeness on the dimension of your inner life? And this is a very important principle, according to what I learned, for really understanding the Torah. It's a crucial principle, because the Torah, as I was taught it, is a spiritual teaching. And the answer is, closeness is similarity. So, I'm sure you've all had the experience, at least I have, that, I could be with my wife sitting on top of her, and if we just had an argument, I may as well be on the moon. Likewise, I could be traveling, and if we're in harmony with one another, and we feel the same way about something, there's a real sense of intimacy there. So this was clear that there was a lot of, I could see that. So suddenly, when you apply this concept, which we've all pretty much, I'm sure, experienced, to this idea, this existential condition, that one has a sense of their own individuality, their own uniqueness, their own selfness, against the backdrop of being, which is an all-inclusive fact. By the way, that's how I found out that God exists. Because I suddenly understood, I definitely understand what it is to be. I have a sense of being in me. It's not arguable. I feel connected to you through being, through all of you. So the problem then is that this sense of self or individuality is by definition opposite of the fulfillment that I'm after, which is being. In a spiritual realm, they couldn't be further apart. That's a problem. Because you understand, unless one can bring those two together, there can be no fulfillment. Because they're as far apart as California is from New York.
Can you reiterate what are those two things you're trying to
Sure.
bring together?
You've got, on the one hand, a sense of self, ego, I, which is nothing actually but the sum total of one's own desires. And on the other hand, you have being as an all-inclusive fact, singularity, oneness. And these two things are completely opposite. And that's really a problem.
How can they if the self is part of being?
It's a good question. It's a good
I
question.
have another question for you.
Okay. Which one? You want me to answer the last one?
No, this new one here. Does God equal being?
Good question.
You seem to suggest that it did.
I understand. It's a good question. In fact, the answer is no. Okay. Actually, we can't say anything about God. Because when we really talk about it, we're talking about a source, so that's already not it. Okay. That's an all-inclusive fact. So because it's all-inclusive, it's nameless. Because the minute I name it, it now is specific. It's not all-inclusive.
Does God include everything that is?
and more.
Is God good?
Let me put it this way. If we have a condition of all-inclusive singularity, it means that there's no lack in that condition, right? Which means, first of all, it can receive nothing. So this is very important, by the way, because in religious verbiage, you will often hear doing things for God. Let me be very clear that according to Torah, there is no doing for God.
Then I have a question.
Hold on.
Gotcha.
Let me finish it. And I understand that that's quite surprising for many, but that is actually the case, and I can explain that if you're interested. The other thing is, though, that this is the reason why we refer to God in the masculine tense. Because if there exists a condition where there is no lack, it only has one expression, which is giving. It can't do anything else. It can't receive because it includes everything, you see. So we, in the wisdom, that is referred to as goodness.
But if it includes everything, then what can it give to? That assumes there's
It
something
can,
outside of it.
there is the ego. It can give to us, which is actually our purpose, because you see, the purpose of creation is actually to receive everything.
Where does bad fit in your worldview?
Hold on. I'll answer that. These concepts of good and bad, I prefer not to venture into them because they're so highly subjective. I would say that those concepts are by their own nature egoic. Okay? Rather, what I would say, and by the way, this is another sort of basic tenet of the wisdom, is that we need to understand it in a cause and effect process. Now, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of beautiful things to this. First of all, which was mind-blowing to me, was one day it came to my attention that question came up, how do you judge the quality of a spiritual text? It's a good question, because there's a lot of texts out there that masquerade as being spiritual. And the answer was very simple. It made a lot of sense. The extent to which it has an insight. Spiritual texts, by their nature, have an inner component because they're dealing with the inner. And this is one of the reasons why it's important to mention that the Torah is in a specific language of the root and the branch. What that means is that there is an architecture to the language of the Torah that's a spiritual architecture because it goes from the outside to the inside, i.e. the root and the branch. Okay? So that was very important to understand. And in the same way, there are 4 levels to Torah, which is also very interesting, why that is. Those 4 levels of the Torah are associated with the 4 components that go into desire. So another surprising thing was the tetragrammaton, the Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, is not a word. So any kind of attempt to turn it into a word is completely incorrect. There are 4 initials that represent the 4 stages of the unfolding of desire. Now that's interesting. That our sort of sign for the highest name of God is actually desire. And that comes back to your question in that the desire or the lack is the component that becomes the vessel for one's experience of fulfillment. Now, the problem is that that same vessel, which is the receiver, is in the way of the fulfillment because it keeps limiting it. Now, everyone, by the way, has had this experience. If you've ever had an orgasm, for example, you'll know that it's really great. Why is it great? Because you lose yourself until you say, wow, that was great. It's over. Because now you just inserted the self back into the equation. And now it became, again, limited. Happens in everything. You see a beautiful sunset, beautiful work of art, you hear a beautiful, whatever it is, a joke, music, whatever. You'll notice that the problem that one experiences existentially is that you do taste the joy, you do taste the fulfillment. By the way, everybody has. One of the great things about being in the consciousness of the singularity or the fulfillment or God is that you don't want to do anything. You're just there. Because in God, there's nothing to do. It just is. So whether you get there by meditating or whether you get there by love-making or whether you get there by admiring beauty, everybody's had a taste of this. You would have to have a taste of this, by the way, or you wouldn't go on with your life. Because what you're running after, specifically, whatever that taste is for you, is a taste of what I'm talking about.
Sorry, just a question about something earlier you said regarding this idea of the gendering of God as male and this idea of giving, and then the implication is that somehow you're gendering us as the female. Okay, so right, so you're privileging this notion of the male as the one who's giving, and the notion that the female is always is the recipient.
No, just opposite. As a matter of fact, it's a beautiful question. It's just opposite. Because you understand that it's the receiver that actually defines what's being given. Because you understand the singularity has no definition. It just is. It's called in physics a possibility amplitude, which means that in quantum mechanics, for example, if you look for a particle, you get a particle. If you look for a wave, you get a wave. Now, what does that mean? On the subatomic realm, we're dealing with particles and how they move. So a particle is a specific thing. It's a specific mass at a specific time and place. A wave just goes everywhere, in all directions. And what they discovered, which toppled classical physics, is that particles are waves and waves are particles. When you measure for waves, you get waves. When you measure for particles, you get particles. And this was really a problem because it meant that you could not have an objective experiment.
What was the experiment?
Yeah, it meant that Schrodinger's cat was the experiment. It meant that if you remove, if you remove the observer, there's nothing. So this is, by the way, really incredible. And by the way, exactly what the wisdom teaches. That the place of intersection of reality is in the experiencer, and what creates, and that reality is a social construction that is a collaboration of actions.
It's funny, if you had never mentioned Torah, I could have imagined you were talking about Mahayana Buddhism.
Well,
what distinguishes everything you've been presenting from Vedanta Hinduism, Mahayana Buddhism?
It's a good question. It's a great question.
Or certain kinds of Taoism.
It's a great question.
And then with the gendering issue, why couldn't then also with the dynamics you would have a male recipient as well? I'm curious.
You can.
Okay.
Let me answer
Okay.
both questions.
Okay.
Okay, they're beautiful questions. In the prophet Micah, it says that at the end of days, all the nations with their gods will meet in Jerusalem and pray to Hashem. Now this is an odd thing to say. Isn't that idolatry? No. First of all, let's stop taking two words, Hashem, and making them one. Because that's a problem. Because they're two words. It means the name. Why do we call it the name? Because this is actually unbelievable. Because of what I just explained to you about the experimenter and the experiment. Whatever your desire is, that's what it's going to be. By the way, that's the secret of manna. I won't go there tonight, but that's what it's talking about in the story of the manna. Because again, it's in the language of the root and the branch, and whatever they wanted to taste, that's what they tasted. In other words, wherever your head is at, wherever your desire is at, that's what it's going to be. Because it's an all-inclusive fact of endless, infinite potential according to where your desire is. That's actually what it is. Now, interestingly, the Baal Salam says, all the teachings of the world are included in Torah. Now, and then he goes on to say, God forbid that you should think this is any kind of nationalism or that there's any kind of possessiveness connected to the wisdom. So, what he's saying is that truth is Torah. It's not Jewish, by the way. That's another thing that I learned, which was very interesting for me because since I went all through this process, but the reason that I originally became an Orthodox, modern Orthodox observant Jew, was that I had a girlfriend. I love this. This is great. I had a girlfriend who I wasn't married to who got pregnant. And innocently, I said to her when my son was born, I said, I don't know, Jewish people, I'm like, my people, we do, I don't know, circumcisions, they call it Brits, I don't know. It's a party, we cut off the penis, and I don't know, it's great. People celebrate it. And that's really where, that was my level of where I was at. We had bagels, it would be like bagels. Bagels and pain, And that's how it started, because I couldn't get any rabbis in New York to do a Brit, because we weren't married. My girlfriend was adopted, so she wasn't sure she was Jewish in the first place, and this was like a huge problem. And me, I was just trying to get some bagels together and have a party for my son, So I finally found somebody. But the deal was that my girlfriend had to convert to Judaism. And if she's going through it, I may as well be supportive and learn too, right? And that preemptively we would do it at the 8th day, and then we'll get back to it in 2 years after the conversion and make it kosher. And that's actually what started the process for me. And then the first lesson that we had, the rabbi came over to our home and threw out the entire kitchen into the garbage. I thought that was very compassionate. And that was sort of the beginning. But this idea that this interaction of the self as an experiencer, and not only that, a co-creator, by the way. Because it's not just that we passively experience, and this is coming to your question. We actually create. We create according to our desires. Now this is essential, because you understand if one wants to be close to the singularity and the being and the all-inclusive fact, which one of its expressions is that things get created from it through its interaction with us. That would mean that we would have to be the creator in that relationship. It doesn't create, it just is. We create. And in that way, we actually become God. And that's the point, because the more God we can become like, the more similar we become like, and the closer we become like. So the point is coming back to your question specifically, is that, first of all, it's made very clear in the wisdom that the Torah is for the whole world. When we speak of the wisdom, we're speaking about the wisdom of what I'm explaining to you, of basically receiving and giving, which is why Kabbalah is called receiving. It's not that you receive something special if you study it. You may or may not. It's that actually it's the study of desire. It's the study of receiving, because it's that receivingness that actually enables one to experience the singularity and the whole. Now, this question of yours, this relationship between masculine and feminine. So, by the way, just to be clear, in a most basic level, and so here's something, a little apropos to our culture's values, is that actually it is the feminine component that defines the reality, because desire is the feminine component. And that's, by the way, also associated with the secret of Shabbat. Shabbat, or that relationship between the Shekhinah and the Creator, Shekhinah being the feminine aspect, that whole dance, actually, that we're discussing here, that is the Shabbat, okay? And that should, by the way, that practice of Shabbat is, I'll come to it. Let me just finish this. That practice of Shabbat is literally a practice that should be occurring as a constant practice of trying to bring the self together with the singularity. Now, I want to come back to that, and then I'll get back to question, because it's sort of the last thing I wanted to share, is that, so we have a basic existential problem, which is that the fulfillment that we're after is opposite of our nature. And we learned that in spirituality, closeness is similarity. So I'm saying this is a real problem. You will never, I'm sure you'll all understand, you will never go beyond yourself. You're stuck in it. That's a problem. That's a real problem.
Do you change your nature the more you study?
No. Actually, the more you study, you don't change your nature.
If you can't go beyond yourself, then can I disregard your whole talk?
If that were the end of the talk, yes. But fortunately, there's more. Which is this. This is the secret behind Rabbi Akiva's prescription that the guiding principle of the Torah is to love your fellow as yourself. By the way, that is the guiding principle. All the other 612 mitzvot have the sole purpose of enabling one to achieve loving your fellow as yourself.
613.
Yeah, that's one. So,
Is it possible to achieve it without doing the 613? 612. 613, that's 12.
well, let me first explain what it means. So obviously, first of all, that's very problematic. Loving people as yourself. Right? Secondly, connected to this was something, is another concept that used to really give me problems. The big problem for me was like, I'd ask a question like, why are we doing this? Why do we have to like pray 3 times a day? What's that all about? And I would get this answer, well, because it says so. And that was extremely unsatisfying to me. Well, I had an experience one day. A teacher said to me, listen, Michael, I'd like you to do a little exercise. We're going to do a little exercise today. I want you to take this broom, and you know, we were near a beach. He said, I want you to go to the beach, and I'd like you to sweep the beach. Now, part of the practice that I was in at the time was that I was going to do whatever he told me to do. Now, that should be obvious to everybody why I would agree to such a thing. Because if I'm trying to get around my own ego, I'm not going to listen to me. I have to listen to somebody else. And I wouldn't just, by the way, go out and listen to anybody. But I had a good teacher. So, I thought that was, kind of a strange project. Go sweep a beach. I mean, when are you done? So I went out with my broom. And it's amazing. If you ever try to sweep a beach, it's really hard. It's not what you think. Like the first 5 minutes, cool, I can do this. I'm there. After about a half an hour, your ego starts screaming. Excuse me, this is really stupid. Like, what is the point to this? Because actually there's nothing in it that your desire can hook up to. This is just idiotic. It's actually out of your mind, isn't it? It's above your mind, which is why you can't do it. You do it for a few hours, and I know I'm speaking from experience. You do it for an hour or two, you really feel like you're losing it. You feel like you're nuts. But it's an interesting thing. You do it long enough, and you become the beach. It's interesting. Yourself eventually dissolves away, and there's only beach. And the reason that my teacher sent me out to sweep that beach is that gave me a glimpse of what fulfillment could look like. Because suddenly, the me part in it had been brought under control. And that's actually what I had wanted to learn in the first place. So that was very interesting. And suddenly I realized, it's only through actions, beginning with the action of a certain kind of mindfulness, which is, by the way, the basic point of saying brachas, is to become aware of oneself as a starting point. It's only through that it becomes possible to transform the consciousness. This is in psychology called behavioral psychology, and we know it works, by the way. We know today that it's actually a lot more effective than analysis. That if you want to change something in oneself, just get a new habit. Just get a new habit. So suddenly, I was introduced to this idea that one could take habitual actions, and through habitual actions, one could change themselves. That's actually the secret of the mitzvot. That's why they're called commandments. It's not because God commanded it. What are you talking about? What God? Commanded what? It's because once one has reached a certain point in their own inner development, in order to succeed at overcoming the ego, one has to do an action for its own sake. In the moment I'm doing the action according to my desire, I'm just increasing my desire again. So see, I always think it's very interesting, it's very good to give to charity. It's great, except unfortunately it's not really solving anything. Actually, giving charity, for example, to build a hospital, will increase the need for more hospitals.
How's that?
Because actually what's happening is, in most cases, what's actually being expressed is a greater sense of self. It would only be in the condition that somebody gave charitably, completely anonymously, and did it not because of their own desires, but did it simply because they were told to do so, and without any emotions automatically gave, all right, that there wouldn't be any increase of egotism in the world whatsoever by building a hospital. The problem is that that's not the way people give. They give and they put their names on the hospitals, which increases the reason we need hospitals, because the source of all evil in the world is egotism. Because it's the egotism that separates us not only from the singularity, but actually our experience of the singularity is our experience of one another.
So, after this talk, would you go to the children's wing of a cancer hospital and tell the mother who's watching her child die of cancer that the only evil there is her egotism?
No. Because one of the things, and this comes back to your question, that obviously I'm giving tonight some basic concepts. All of these things have many, many details to them and require a serious commitment. But another aspect of this is that it's all multidimensional, as anything is. So we can't say, on one hand, that any one person is responsible, for example, in your example, for all the egotism in the world, from which that kind of suffering results. On the other hand, though, if we wish to eradicate that kind of suffering, the only thing that any of us can ever change is what's going on inside of ourselves. It is self-evident.
This is the reason
Hold on. It's self-evident that the world is the world that it is today because of who we are as individuals collectively interacting.
Yeah. Now, there's an interesting story that Ralph Waldo Emerson, whose philosophy sounds very similar to everything you gave tonight, was a famous latecomer to the cause of abolition. And he didn't care about a lot of progressive causes for a long time. In Self-Reliance, he said, "Don't tell me about the poor, they're not my poor," you know. And some of his fellow transcendentalists, like, you know, one woman, Elizabeth Peabody, said she declared his version of transcendentalism to be egotheism. That it led to insulation, arrogance.
Sure.
And that's how I find your talk. I think that what you said about evil is entirely unacceptable. And sorry.
Why do you find it unacceptable?
Because to say that all the problems that exist in the universe come from our attachment to self, I find to be completely out of sync.
Where else would they come from? Name a problem that's not egocentric in its foundation.
People didn't see it as a problem, it wouldn't be.
Right. Okay.
Now, already the fact that
Yeah,
people
yeah.
see it as a problem is an egocentric construction.
Really, you think so? Okay.
Absolutely.
Sure. The sweetest...
Any concept, intellectual concept, by the way, is egoic. Any of them.
Including you just gave tonight?
Absolutely. As a
So
matter of fact,
don't talk then.
no, I would
So
say,
it's all egocentric then.
it is.
Tonight.
What I would say
So
is,
therefore it's evil.
what I would say is, and where the line of demarcation is the extent to which one can achieve a similarity with the whole. The only way to do that would be through emulating the behavior of the whole, which would mean giving. So I would tell you very clearly that, yes, everything that I explained tonight was essentially egoic.
Okay.
Obviously it is because I'm talking to you. So myself is here. You invited me. You invited myself. Yes, that's true. And the only way that I can operate in a physical body is egoically. Except I can develop a second nature through habitual actions of giving to others, not for the sake of my own self-satisfaction, but just so, as a practice. And eventually, it is possible to experience one's life in a way where one is able to isolate the self and thus control it. And I would absolutely say to you that I think you will find it, if you're really rigorous about it, very difficult to describe to me any suffering in the world that does not, on some level, have its foundation in egotism. Because suffering, by definition, requires a self to suffer.
So then animals don't suffer?
I don't know anything about what animals do, and neither do you.
I'm not sure if that's true.
It's true because all of the studies that you can bring to my attention are also egoic constructions. It is true. Because unfortunately, one never comes out of the cage, which is the problem, of the self.
Which gives your whole talk tonight nothing but relativism.
No, it doesn't. Actually, what it says is that we
can... There's no objective reference to anything you say. You're contained in self.
I don't agree. I think that we can see very clearly, as I started, that there are two conditions.
It's self-refuting.
But all the philosophy, so is your Buddhism
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't, you know.
I just want to say something. You said a lot. I just want to
jump in if I may.
I just want to say that I understood and I listened to what this guy said, and I got him entirely, and I agree with him 100%. And I don't think there's anything bullshit in what he's got to say.
I love this talk.
And so what I'm saying is, you're talking about egotism, and you're listening as one ego. And you definitely got one.
Whoa. Why are we insulting over here?
I'm not insulting you. I'm just saying before you point the finger at another guy and call him an egotist. I really carefully.
Chrissy, he asked based on, he said based on what he is saying, if everything
No,
involves...
based on what he's hearing. It's not based on what he said. I heard exactly what he said. And I heard something totally different than what you heard.
And people can
actually, I have to say, we heard the same talk. I love the talk so
I
far.
could repeat his words.
Talk. Forgive me if I come across too strong, you know. But I just, you know, I can't help but feel that it does.
You don't believe all the stuff when it comes to me.
It's not about belief. It's about you either get it or you don't
I
get
have
it.
one
And
more
you don't
question. I
get
have
it.
one more question.
Yes.
If God is completely self, you know, if there's nothing lacking in being, okay. And you mentioned earlier that human beings somehow we create. Now, I love that concept. It's a very Jamesian concept. That somehow the cognition creates, we create. But if being itself lacks nothing, then what is there for us to create? There has to be something lacking. There has to be something lacking in order for us to contribute. But if everything is full, like a plenum, and there's nothing missing,
Our ego has to be.
You want?
I can answer your question.
I'd like to hear his answer.
Well,
Correct.
You know,
I-
because it presupposes his
from
thinking.
my understanding, from what you're talking, is basically
Why can he answer?
is that because can I answer it first? Is it all right?
Sorry, it's my egotism.
You can
You can answer.
You can say whatever you want to say. You just
Of
don't have
course.
to tell them that it's an
No, yeah. No, basically, my understanding from what you said, and my personal experience in being, is that we can create a state which is continuously changing, and which at certain moments is more open to being. So we create our state because we desire to be, or we desire not to be. or we hate ourselves, and we don't want to give because we hate ourselves and we feel bad when we give, or we hate ourselves and we want to try to give to change what we are inside. And so they're all different things and different truths, and each truth is within us. And who are we to judge what is true in you, and who are you to judge what's true in me?
It's impossible.
It's impossible, right?
It's impossible.
Main thing is to be able to kind of like create yourself so that you're able to be everywhere.
Well,
in some ways.
I would agree with that. I would simply add to it that the only possibility to create oneself is in collaboration with others. Because there is no self without an identity. A self is an identity, and an identity is a collaborative effort. And so the truth of it is, the wonderful gift of being invited to collaborate with all of you this evening, because that's actually what we're doing, is the being and the sharing of this experience is not my opinion or yours, or my experience or yours. It just is. But that isness occurs when we are together.
I just want to take this.
Can I respond?
I just want to say, I want you to take this opportunity to thank Michael and to say that let's end the presentation period. Now, anybody wants to ask questions, discuss, please. Michael is going to sit down. Go for a little while. Thank you very much, Michael.
I got a question. I mean, that's the way you see it. That collaborating is a way of reaching to where you want to reach. Personally, I've had that experience, and I think it's very important. But at the same time, I had other experiences where I was totally alone in a mountain.
Yes.
All right? In the darkness, on my own. I didn't know where I was because I got lost in the darkness. It got dark, and it got rainy, and I was there, and I was alone in the mountain.
Right. But the you part.
Let me just finish my story. But what I'm saying is that I was in a state at that moment where I was being because I had a trust in the whole.
That's, yes.
All right? And I had such trust in the whole that the whole was, for me, Hashem. And that when I was alone at that moment in the mountain, on the darkness, where, I don't know, there could have been animals or wolves coming towards me, or bears, or I don't know what, I trusted that Hashem was with me, and there was a transformation, a creation within me.
Isn't that a wonderful experience?
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's wonderful.
So I think each person has their capacities in their process that is valid.
Of course.
Whatever it is.
No question.
And sometimes it takes a step backwards, 2 steps backwards.
Of course. Absolutely.
And I think that's what's interesting for
I
me.
agree.
My interest is that how much alive can I become when I'm awake? Because I was kind of sleepy. But I was hearing you, though. I mean, though I was like dozing off, I still was hearing you. I was basically being in the space where I was at this particular time.
Of course. Absolutely.
So,
well, no, that's nice. Thank you for sharing that. That's nice. Yes.
All physical pain is just healthy, right? No, ego means just be conscious. If you're conscious, you're going to feel pain. So yeah, all evil comes from ego, but that's not a bad ego. So
Well, first of all, I would say ego is not a bad thing. As a matter of fact, according to the wisdom, the first stages of spiritual development are the development of egotism. An ego is a vehicle It's like a car. You wouldn't say a car is good or bad. It depends where you drive the car. So the point is very easy to understand. You have a self. Without yourself, there's no game. You wouldn't be here. So there's no story without the self. It's not a bad thing. Actually, it's a good thing. Because with the correct practice, life practice, one can develop and connect their desires to the singularity and fulfillment by developing a second nature of giving to others. When the ego or the self finds its source of joy in altruism, this is as close to the truth as an individual can get. You are a self, but you're a self devoted to the actions of the whole, which means that now the self is able to experience the whole, or being. You are an oxymoron, according to the wisdom. So in other words, I'll give you an example, a very simple example. It's actually the example that the Baal Salam gives. So let's say you have a person, they're hungry, very hungry, and they haven't eaten in a couple of days, and they get invited to somebody's home for dinner. And the host has cooked a wonderful banquet for them. And they come into the dining room, and you'll notice that an average person in that situation won't just sit down and start eating. It's interesting. They're starving. A meal has been cooked for them, and yet there is some resistance. What is the resistance? Exactly. Very good. The resistance is there's a sense of shame that comes with being in the position of being the total receiver, okay? Because one feels lower than the host, so they won't do that normally. Now, if the host says, on the other hand, listen, it's okay, I cooked a meal for you. Suddenly, that shame disappears. And you can sit and eat the meal. Why? Because actually, even though you're hungry, you're not eating the meal for you anymore. You're actually eating the meal as a gift to the host. That's connecting the self to giving. Now imagine what the world would look like if that was the source of our happiness, was those kind of actions. It'd be a completely different world. You understand? There would be no poverty. Because if people's source of happiness came from receiving in order to give, there would be no ownership.
But there's no point of giving, because then you're taking.
No, you're receiving to give. Another example I can give you is, I like wine a lot. Okay? Huh? Yeah. Yeah. Another example I give is...
It's just a cycle, like the cycle.
No, it's not just the cycle. It's not just the cycle. It's called fulfillment.
But it's going.
No, actually, it's going within itself. What is wealth? Wealth is circulation. It's not having. A man that has will lose everything. A man who circulates will always be in the running. So it's, of course it's energy. Everything is energy.
The philosophy from Salam,
The Baal Salam.
is that compatible with nationalism?
No, not really. No, it's deeper. Much.
It would be compatible with Zionism.
No.
Would not be compatible.
It's a good question. The difference is this. It's a very good question. The difference between socialism and what I'm talking about. No, but I mean socialism. Is that socialism is forced upon the individual by society. What I'm talking about is the development of the individual. I might have a beer. That would be very nice.
Bring a beer. You know, this concept you're talking about, and Carl Jung called it the archetypal God self.
Yes.
And he said the experience of the archetypal God self is the beginning and is the expression of the luminous things. It's the divine touch. And everyone has it. Like you said, I've had like at least 20, 30, 50 times in my life. And specific instances, and sometimes little and sometimes dramatic, like his experience in the mountains. And you know, it's also expressed in Hinduism, in the Atman Brahman. Are you familiar with?
Thank you so much.
And it's also expressed actually in the painting, in the Hundertwasser painting. There is a fish, which is the Greek symbol of the soul, and you notice there's the fish, which is the eye of God in the painting. And you see the little fish? That's you. You're the little fish. This
Actually,
is the big fish.
Exactly what I'm talking about.
Exactly.
What I'm talking
And you notice the big fish has bars on him, and that's because God in the garden watches in the garden, and he bars himself from action because he gave the little fish free will. And that's part of the game. The little fish has to choose to be receptive. He has to say yes. You know, he can say no. I don't want to do this thing. I want to be an egotist.
Do you have any
Yeah, I do.
I want to come and see.
Yeah, I would love to.
I think I can help you.
That would be great. Because that's my information on it there, and that's
I'm going to call
the card.
you. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's good. Here, and keep these. This is actually an expression of what you're talking about. Here you have Hundertwasser in front of the painting, right here, and here you have me with the Hundertwasser beginning the process of how do you tell the story, and how do you make the connection. And since we're on a budget, you know, I'm going to have to like play the guy, and you can see the resemblance.
I really want to talk to you about this. I think it's a great project. I want to talk to you.
Yes, anyway,
wonderful.
keep things. I really got what you were having to say, and I would love to I'm going to get a copy from Gio of what you were talking about. You said it really well.
Thank you.
And I heard it perfectly.
Thank you. Well,
I know, but I got it more.
No, you didn't.
I do want to.
Less discerning.
I can tell you the points which you didn't get in.
No, I can do it
what
for
they
you.
were.
I don't think so. I think you missed the boat. Sorry.
No, I think
I caught it.
It's about the Atman Brahman.
I know Advaita Vedanta.
I know,
Yeah.
and it's also about like Taoism, whatever.
I know what it is.
So
Truth, I want to hear.
Yeah.
I want to hear
No,
your
you
answer
heard
about
it.
nationalism.
You're just not critical about it. So less interesting. Okay.
I'd like to take it down.
The bottom line is, and it actually relates to our conversation.
So you're taking off?
What we experience as the objective world is really an experience of our interactions with one another as a result of our own inner projections. The ego, which is centered in the body, is confirmed and reaffirmed through social interaction. So the Baal Salam explains that the only freedom an individual has, ever, is the freedom to choose their environment. The problem with all of these political, economic systems is that they're rooted in the collective. They are demands that are made upon the individual for the sake of the society. It is because of that that they all are destined to fail.
But you just mentioned that we become ourselves by interacting. And we choose our society, we choose our environment. So if you want to be in a socialist environment, wouldn't that also be a choice?
It's a choice. And it is a choice. But that's one of the lowest levels within the range of spiritual development, although it's a crucial level. In other words, at some point, a person begins to take altruistic actions for their sake, for themselves, because they want to, which means there is a fulfillment coming back to them, the self, and an expansion of the self. Generally, as that continues, a person will become aware of the fact that they're not able to achieve a sense of ongoing fulfillment. It keeps short-circuiting. And now you have to understand that we're all driven inherently by the pleasure principle. There's no getting away from that. So in the end, that sense of I'm disconnected again from the source of my pleasure creates a certain kind of frustration, i.e. a certain kind of suffering, which then compels a certain kind of spiritual or inner development. An inner development towards sharing. What happens when, it's very interesting. You want to create a lot of sharing? Blow a bomb up, God forbid, across the street. You will see instant sharing. Suddenly everybody forgets their own personal agenda and everybody starts helping each other. You ever notice that? Okay? The reason for that is, again, that all suffering is
also only in a global society. If moms would keep on going, people will become much better, worse animals.
All suffering, as I said earlier, finds its source in the self, in the ego.
You seem to have a philosophy that
by the way, it's not a philosophy, and
whatever.
it's not mine.
Yeah, okay.
That's for sure.
To escape yourself, to escape.
No, it's not to escape yourself. It's to.
Okay, but getting back to
hold on.
nationalism, I want to get back.
Hold on. Just to be clear, it's not a practice of escaping this. To the contrary. By the way, it's a very important point, because we teach, for example, children, in their conforming with society, to share, to do more sharing, to do more giving. One of the byproducts of this basically faulty way of bringing up children is we bring up people that are extremely lacking and extremely longing for more attention, more love, more security. And so we bring up basically megalomaniacs. Okay? This is problematic. Because what the child is actually longing for is maximum love, maximum security, so on and so forth. Right? So you'll read in the Torah, for example, every time God, in the language of the root and the branch, speaks to one of the patriarchs, they always answer, I am here. And this usually goes unnoticed. But it's a deep secret. What it means is, before we can even begin the process of any development towards giving, we have to be holy ourselves. Which means that actually we need maximum self. And that's part of the process. If you see a child, there's nothing more, I have 4 children, there's nothing more egocentric than a baby.
Yeah, because he develops as he grows older.
No, but actually what he develops is more egotism. A little baby comes into the world, And the little baby, obviously, their only concern once they begin to develop itself is their own needs. This eventually develops into a kind of spiritual egotism. So suddenly they want to be loved. I mean, actually, it's very interesting. What right do they have to want to be loved? They want to be loved, they want to be cared for, they want security. Now, they want to be respected. They don't want to be just loved and respected and have security just from their parents or from their siblings. Actually, they want it from everyone.
Yeah, but I think even babies have empathy.
Yeah, so do adults.
There's empathy
Right.
even at the baby level for another baby.
No, no.
They made experiments.
No, don't misunderstand me. All people have within them the components, as I explained tonight, of being and the self. As a matter of fact, in the language of the root and the branch, any reference in the Humash to body is a reference to the self or the will to receive. And any reference to the soul is a reference to the quality of giving or being that one experiences within oneself. You understand? Your experience of being is actually an experience of giving. Because being, by definition, is an experience of the collective. And you can't have an experience of the collective without some interaction.
Let's get back to the idea of nationalism. So, nationalism, in the sense of you're rejecting that idea, is that right?
Well, I don't know. What do you mean by nationalism?
Nationalism is egoism. No, we have to have our own nation. We have to build our own nest. This type of thing. We have to get together and put a border there and so forth.
No, I wouldn't reject that.
Why not? But doesn't that also take away from the other person, from the other nation? Isn't that one of the problems that we have in this world?
The answer to the question is, it's a good question. I once was with the Rav and I asked him, listen, if it's all about oneness and being and singularity, why is everything in creation in such diversity? Actually, it doesn't make sense. Two blades of grass aren't the same. The answer was so beautiful. He said, the way to singularity is through sharing and giving. Because the experience of the world through the lens of the ego, or the self, which again is unavoidable, is an experience of diversity. You're projecting individual on the world. The way, again, to transform that into a consciousness closer to truth is to be able to understand that the individual is a condition of sharing. Because what individual implies is a difference. So that means that that difference point becomes like a lock and a key where
so you're saying
it can be experienced.
So that can be projected
right, so
that nation.
That condition, right, that condition you will see infinitely. So you see that in the individual, in the family, in the town, in the state, in the country. You will see it endlessly.
Right.
In every, because it's a spiritual condition.
But the problem with nation is that there are rules, and nations tend to expand. They tend to covet what another nation has.
I mean, they get egotistical.
Right. Nations are egotistical.
So it's not the nation that's the problem.
Well,
it's the egotism that's the problem.
Right, but then it's very hard to get away from that egotism when you have.
It's very hard to get away from egotism because you have a self. That's true. But by the way, that is, according to the Baal Salam, that is the sole purpose of the wisdom, is to enable you and empower you to get beyond the prison of the ego.
I came late, so I'm sorry I didn't get who is the Baal Salam?
Baal Salam is Rav Yehuda Ashlag, Ashlag, Ashlag,
when did he live?
He lived in the 20th century.
Did he write a sefer?
He wrote the Sulam, which is why he's called the Baal Sulam. Sulam means the ladder.
S-U-L-A-M.
S-U-L-A-M.
That's Hebrew?
Yeah, well, it's English.
Baal
Baal, B-A-A-L, master of the ladder.
And what was he, a Sephardic Jew?
He was Sephardic, but he translated the entire Zohar from Aramaic to Hebrew, and he edited the works of the Ari.
And do you know, where was he from? What country?
Eitzahi. Yeah. He ordered it.
What country was he from?
Of the Eitzahi? Yeah.
What country was he from?
He was from Poland, originally. And then he moved to Israel.
You can.
Nice to meet you.
And you can get this in translation, this Baal Salam?
You can get a lot of works in translation. Yes.
So was he? Would you say he was a Zionist or not?
Yes, they give him medication.
I'm cautious of it because we have to define the terms very carefully. What do you mean by Zionism?
Zionism is the philosophy that there is, first of all, one Jewish nation all over the world, and that nation should not be all over the world. It should be only in one place. This is and it's abnormal to be all over the world. It should be in one place. And,
well, obviously it shouldn't be because it's not.
well,
Wait, what is it?
not everything that's not. I mean,
I want to hear that. What
I
is
think
that?
that's what the classical Zionism says. That they want to eliminate the exile. They want to bring people. And to some degree, I mean, some Zionists would say that they want to be a nation like any other nation, like France, like England, and so forth. What they call normalization.
Right.
I think that would be basically what that is.
Well, I would say that he certainly had Zionist leanings, but I would have to qualify that. And you know, I'm having a problem with the conversation. It's entirely my problem because I need to process what you're asking and what you're talking about in a different order. You see, so from a spiritual from a perspective, okay, the whole concept of Israel gets turned on its head.
Of course, it's not a land.
Because it's not a land. Right.
So then you're not a Zionist, because a Zionist feels that the land itself somehow is the solution.
Well, I wouldn't say that either.
No, I mean, to some degree.
I wouldn't say that either. I would say that, and that's why I think it's really more complicated than that.
Or
as one experience evolves in terms of being able to experience the world from the inside out, more and more, what appears to be real as the physical, material world is experienced more and more as a projection. So that would mean that all of these concepts that you're talking about first would need to be experienced and understood and honored as an inner experience in order to be really understood and played with before they become projected, which is exactly, by the way, what the wisdom holds. Interestingly, it's also what contemporary science holds.
One other thing, maybe I'd like to zero in on work. Many people feel that work is really what creates a person, that you are what you do.
Right.
And I don't know if you mentioned that in your talk. You seem to be talking more about being, but I feel that we have that freedom to choose what we do, our work. And that's one way of fulfilling yourself, through work.
Most people that work are pretty unfulfilled.
I know that, but I'm saying if you have a work that is fulfilling, that is a possibility.
I would say that fulfillment would have to come from reaching a certain spiritual location or condition inside of oneself.
Yeah, but let's assume you're a scientist and you're just absolutely fascinated by physics, and you are working in physics, and I think this is or you're working in, you're a writer, you're creating something by writing.
Yeah, nice. I want to see that.
Yeah, okay.
Michael, do you still give your dogs your house? Yes. I used to come. I don't know if you're
I haven't seen
and yeah, but they never put me on the. They put me an email address and nobody ever sent me.
That's what you want to get right now.
Okay.
Okay.
I put it on 3 times.
You have,
I wonder if that's a coincidence.
I'll take care of it. Yeah, maybe. Can I borrow a piece?
Can I put me on your mailing list?
I just didn't want to cut you out.
No, I'm so glad. Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed your questions very much. Sure.
Is this your pen? No, that's right. Wait, it's desires that also come into being, or so then how
First of all, your syntax of experience is as negative, right, which means negative. So this is opposite of being. Actually, on a spiritual level, because location and spirituality, closeness and similarity, you couldn't be more dissimilar.
Does that have any impact?
Of course it does. Aren't you a participant in the world regardless of where you're at? And that's exactly the problem. The problem is the world is literally a reflection of the individuals that make up the world. Right, so there can never be an improvement in the world without there being an improvement in the inner individual. Because the world is a byproduct of where the individual is at, as expressed on a collective action level.
So where does
I'm very interested to talk to you.
Okay.
Because I thought your questions were really good.
Thank you.
So you were going to ask me?
Yeah. A number of questions actually. I guess the first one.
One more follow-up. This question about how the receiving is not necessarily male-female. That's our projection. But I missed something in your life.
No. Receiving is male and female, but and it's not something. It's not something I really think we can turn around in this setting. It is something that we can, and I do teach, and you're welcome to come.
You're saying it's basically both?
No, what I'm saying is something very beautiful.
What's the void?
Which is everything has dimension. One of the biggest challenges for somebody beginning to really get involved with wisdom is the challenge of being able to understand and move between dimensions. Because there's a lot of confusion arises. So in other words, what is feminine on one-dimensional level can be masculine on a lower dimension. Understand? So you have to define, when we talk about insult,
We're asking questions. inside of the house. Did not get what he said.
We talk about infinity. We talk about infinity. The concept that is
I
counting
felt
on
you were
forever.
attacking him, and I was only defending him. You were attacking him.
Exactly this
Basically,
idea.
no. You were attacking him personally.
What is up is down, what is
That's
down
why it
is
came
up,
across.
what is south is west.
That's why it came across to me, and I don't know how many other people there.
It came across as only.
Everyone else. I bet if you ask other people,
you know, if you're
just
interested,
and objectively and listen to what they say,
Right.
you will see.
What you're saying is true, I don't
giving
think it is.
classes now
He was never
uptown,
attacking
on
his
the Upper West Side.
Never say.
You attacked his character.
No, I didn't.
So it's kind of all over the place.
You attacked the views and
Thank you so much. It's very nice to meet you.
ego-driven.
You misunderstood my point.
I heard it, and it's on tape. You listen to it again.
No, you need to listen to it.
It's not.
I'm going to get a copy. I will listen. I recommend you
It has to
too.
all over. Put man in the same level of
Reality as
God.
it is.
Man is a wait a minute.
That's what
He puts man in the same place as God, and he claims that
I understood it perfectly. You missed the point. Because he actually addressed that earlier. And no, you missed it.
No. I'm sorry, my friend.
Listen, if we took this and it was an objective exam and it was graded by impartial, you would get an A minus and I would get A plus.
No, you get an F. You get an F, I get an A. You get an F, you wouldn't be laughing any longer. No.
I listened to your whole argument when you made your presentation. I did. I understand it perfectly. It's hard, and you have a flaw. You know what your flaw is? If you do not trust your being, and you do not trust the experience of your being as it is trying to teach you. And so you are not a Gnostic, you are an intellectual who has ideals, but you do not have experience and you don't trust your experience. I'm a Gnostic.
I'm not a Gnostic. That's definitely true.
And the difference, what he's talking about, I don't believe in beliefs. This man doesn't believe anything. He's out there to experience what is. And his belief gets in the way of experience.
Of loving your fellow in yourself,
but it's all rejection of his own ego.
As a Gnostic, and I'm speaking as one who knows, and I've had experiences you will not believe and cannot believe because they wouldn't fit into your experience.
Like dinosaurs and ancient.
Yes, and also, not only that, but take for example, I stood in front of a slot machine in a casino in the Caspian Sea, and I knew in advance which machine would win on what slot. And now in your world, can that happen?
or is that Jews?
Right.
I'm sorry, I'm going to mingle a little bit. Please take my card and email me at some point if you can.
Thank you
or I'll
very
take
much,
yours
Jonathan.
if you have one.
No, I'll leave it.
All right, thank you.
It was very nice.
It was
to meet
nice.
you, really.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm sorry if my talents keep up as a Serbing. I like to engage in discussion.
Not a problem. I thought it was very good fun.
And your talk was very captivating.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll consider that somehow that I provided a service. So that's
The traditional Judaism seems to make a difference between Jews and non-Jews.
Yes.
We would have much more responsibility to
Well,
fellow
it's not, I wouldn't say traditional Judaism. I would say the garment of the Torah, which is essentially the Torah that has been
It's not
in
good. It's not
place since the destruction of the Second Temple, does not clearly delineate these concepts in their truer inner form. Which is why in today's particular condition of the world, we have a number of conditions. One, that we're in a global village. The second, that the land of Israel is activated again. Okay? And the third is that we have a mixture of languages that actually enable us to learn this and share this together on a more general level. These three conditions have now created a situation where not only is learning Kabbalah recommended, it's actually mandatory, okay? Because there is no way to understand the inside of the wisdom without it. It is actually the point of learning.
But the word rea does not mean fellow. It means your friend, which means you're somebody that you have some connections, either your roommate, your workmate, your neighbor, someone that you actually have a
It's a
personal
human existential.
Yeah.
It's a human existential condition. You understand? I can cut right through it by saying to you, what is a Jew?
Jew is theoretically, the Jew is a member of a people.
No, it's incorrect.
Okay, wait a minute. Who is representative of God.
No,
We're here to.
it's incorrect. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
this is what you're talking about, is the mantle around the
I'm
Torah.
talking about what does the word mean? The word
Yehudi?
Jew comes from Judah,
Right.
which means to praise God. It has a very specific meaning.
Okay,
actually.
fine.
Okay. So,
Israel,
to praise God means, no, Israel is actually two words. Right, it's actually two words, and it means something else.
The struggle with God.
Right. So, the Jew is a person who is a giver. Because the highest form of praise is emulation. And the only thing that God does, the only expression of God is giving. Because there's no lack, so there can't be a receiver. So a Jew is a person whose consciousness is completely connected to receiving for the sake of giving. This is a Jew. That has nothing. I didn't mention your mother, your father, the land, nothing.
And how about Israel?
Okay, Israel is the community of people who are practicing what I just explained together, okay, which is the communal struggle with God to be godlike.
Okay.
So the purpose
A
of
nation
Israel,
of priests.
right? The purpose of Israel, exactly, is to be a nation of priests. Now, I'd like to point out to you that a priest, by definition, has no ownership. A priest has no private property. Right. So you understand that the purpose of Israel is to be the spark that then gives over to the rest of humanity the possibility of the condition of a universal Israel, which is what it means, the prophet Micah, that all the nations with their gods will meet in Yerushalayim and pray to Hashem. Because Hashem is the name which now implies total singularity and oneness, okay? And obviously includes all traditions and all cultures. This entire discussion, God forbid there can be no possessiveness, by the way, in a condition of the Jew. This is impossible. Okay? And certainly in the collective community of Israel, the single purpose of the collective community of Israel is on a collective level to develop the consciousness of loving their fellow as themselves.
And can anybody just automatically become a Jew?
Of course.
Okay.
There were a lot of Jews who were converts, even inside the whole nation. By the way,
and the land that you mentioned that is activated, is that
it's a spiritual location.
Okay, it's not just a land per se. It's not a,
no, see, this is a great question.
Yeah.
The land is only
Actually,
symbolic.
no, this is a great question. Look, it is a physical land.
Right.
What's a physical land? Where does that come from? Let me ask you something.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a geography there.
What is this over here?
Wall.
What is this?
Wall.
How do you know?
That's that.
I
It's
assume it's a
malchut.
wall.
What do you mean? You
can't-
learned it was
Right, exactly.
right. Oh, but that's different, right? Actually, what is it?
Electrons in motion.
Actually, you have no idea what this is. Because what's happening here is that there are photons bouncing off of this into your eye, creating electrochemical impulses which are firing neurologically in your brain. It's still nothing, by the way, right? And when you grew up, you learned that particular configuration of neurological firing, you're going to put that in a little file cabinet in your memory called wall. Okay, that's that. So actually, what this is a concept, not a wall, right? So you have to understand something. inside of you is everything, because inside of you is being, and being is an all-inclusive fact. So you understand that inside of you is a desire for land. It's a desire called land, right? When you project that desire out into the world called land, you know what you get? Dirt. Now, I can explain that in greater, detail so that you would understand it clearly, but it's only to say that in the same way that this is not a wall, the land is not a land. It's a projection of your desire, and it's connected to a lot of influences that were learned and that were adopted and you inherited from your parents and the vessels and so on and so forth. Now, this is a very important concept, because if it weren't for this, there would be no actions in the world. Because action is just the distance between 2 points of evolution. Because time is nothing but a measurement of change. That's all it is. Okay? So you understand that you would not have the possibility for action if you didn't have the possibility to transform concepts. Okay? And it's the possibility to transform concepts that actually allows you to experience fulfillment. Because you are, by definition, as I said, a receiver. You're not a fulfillment. But you can experience fulfillment because you can identify with it, because you're able to give.
Next Wednesday.
The fact is, we now have a land. Right? There is a land there that's been activated.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it seems to have caused a lot of injustice.
Coming up. What is it? What is causing injustice?
The fact that Israel went back to the land.
The land has
The fact that we went back there.
A bunch of wanted meeting cards.
It happened to have caused injustice.
I would say that the whole drama that has unfolded in the land of Israel, and has been unfolding since the beginning of the whole story, is just the drama of the unfolding of the relationship between egotism and truth. And when there is a collective experience and development of a true Israel, okay, that drama will cease to
Yeah, I know, but so far it's been in situations.
So
I feel there's a lot of egotism.
Win.
Right,
That's
exactly.
correct. That's correct. And that's exactly why I'm here tonight, is to talk about that so that we can make it a little better.
You don't seem to believe in changing society to then change it. You feel it's the only way around.
No,
The individual
fact,
changes.
I am absolutely positive that you cannot change society. I am absolutely positive of it. We have, by the way, a few thousand years of history to back my position up. And the only change that's possible is the change within the individual. And there's a very simple reason for that.
But let me ask you this, aren't there better societies than other societies?
No. Where?
I don't know.
One? Because I'd like to live there.
Hitler's society was worse than our society. The society he created.
You look at Ruth
Benedict.
Benedict.
An awful society. Cruelty, mercy was considered a crime there. To be soft, to be merciful, therefore that's a crime.
Yeah, and like in Spartan
From
society.
your subjective point of view, that's your subjective.
But you look at Ruth Benedict, who wrote Patterns of Culture, and she said utopia was a feasibility within a limitation of, I believe she said, 200 households. That everybody's definition of utopia was functionally different, so that it would only be feasible in the kibbutz kind of setting, that you could create these kind of mini utopias. But those utopias would be different from the utopia in the John Birch Society.
I find, my experience is that people from the underdeveloped world, I find much more generous than people in the first world. I just do.
I would find that
why? Because
but I wouldn't say that that's better. People in underdeveloped worlds also have totalitarian governments. So it's,
I mean, yeah, okay, but on a personal level, I find them more generous. general.
Well, you know,
It may or may not be according to your own experiences and according to what you're projecting. By the way, you seem like a very nice man, so I can imagine that your projections of the world are also very nice. But I can also say unequivocally, because it's self-evident, we have a big mess here. And that mess is related to a single problem. One single problem. Egotism.
Money.
Because without egotism, you wouldn't have poverty. Without poverty, you probably wouldn't have half the diseases you have. I listened to a lecture tonight before I came here of a biologist who explained that about 3/4 of the diseases that are cancer are related to the pollution of our environment, which is a direct result of corporate greed. I listened to it for 2 hours. And that it is a covert action on the part of corporations and governments to keep it quiet in front of the public. I'm sure that that's true. I'm sure that's true. So suddenly you see the pollution of our environment, poverty, disease, war, social unrest. These are all the results of selfishness. Cure the selfishness, you'll cure the problem. It's very simple. And you don't cure the selfishness, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a leak.
So you feel that any type of social action has no impact?
No, I don't feel that. You see, the problem with many of these questions, not only from yourself but from others reflect, is there's a place for everything within being, by the way, because it includes everything. If it exists, obviously it must need to exist, otherwise it wouldn't exist. So there is a social level, a social dimension to what I'm talking about. So obviously, for example, nonviolent demonstrations or actions on the part of the collective to increase altruism in the world are positive, as long as there's an understanding on the part of the participants that ultimately it has to be a self-development and self-altruism that's finally going to be the thing that's going to transform the world. It's not going to be the social action. Social action is simply going to be a vehicle, essentially, to put pressure and to start a conversation. But we see this time and time again. We've seen revolutions, we've seen social actions, and we see very clearly that they have not brought harmony and peace into the world. Maybe momentarily, but not for very long. The only thing that will ever bring, by the way, it's not even a question of harmony and peace. It's a more pertinent question, which is the final expression of the greatest potential of a human being. A human being, you see, we're so far away from an understanding of our own innate potential that we don't even appreciate any longer that human being doesn't mean a person. It means a humane being. That's actually implied in that terminology is that our greatest potential, our greatest expression is to be humane beings, okay?
No, humane is derived from human as a designation.
I understand that. But the designation of humane being, the human being, okay, implies on a spiritual level that we have a capacity to be more.
We're not animals. Like an animal doesn't know mercy. It just acts. But a human can show mercy.
And it's, but by the way, it's interesting, you know, if
In certain cases,
all the time.
Animals have all the. You know, Caleb. In Hebrew, a dog is called Caleb. Why? It's called Caleb.
Full of emotion.
It's like a heart. It has a heart. A dog is very loyal.
And elephants don't undersell a dolphin or an elephant. I'd include them in the human family.
All animals have emotions.
Every animal, I think, has
They don't
an
have the
element.
first degree of...
How would you know that emotions make a distinction? They're both beings outside of animals.
Well, what do we know about anything?
Exactly, but we surmise
No, hold on a second. Hold on. What do we know about anything?
You have experience.
knowledge of other people may be experiencing pain. For example, there's a certain type, it's a certain type, perhaps it's a very limited, but it's a certain type of genuine information on which you act. It's sort of main, it's almost like a language. That being the case, there's no reason for you to exclude animals from that
No, I think you're
language.
missing this. Clearly, animals experience suffering.
Yes,
Right, no question about it. But what does that mean?
I don't know.
Okay. What do we know about anything? Okay. I would like to suggest. I would like to suggest to you very little. What we know, again,
comes through our 5 senses.
what we know is essentially egoic construction. It's not what comes through our senses. That's the material. That's the material that comes to us through our senses. But what we know is based on mental construction. Right. So, what I'm saying to you is that when we detect suffering in anything, an animal included, ultimately it's a projection of our own experience of suffering. That's not to say that, by the way, that's not important. To the contrary. As a matter of fact, no, what I'm saying is simply is that
I would. I'm sorry.
What would you say?
I would. What? I would say it's much other than that.
What?
Our
Yeah.
No, our knowledge of being outside of ourselves is a projection.
So, in 2000, I was walking by the Ganges in India, and I was in another country, and there was a dog. The dog would take a few steps and jump on its back and start screaming and waving its legs in the air. The dog was obviously in agony. Okay, screaming. There's some kind of microbe digging into the flesh of this organism. The pain was as palpable as watching a human being being tortured. You're watching a mammal body being tortured. How is that a projection of myself?
Because you know about torture.
No. Too artificial, too indirect.
The answer,
too artificial,
the answer
too
is
indirect.
the answer is
It was
very,
not a construct of my mind.
the answer is very simple.
Okay, please.
You wouldn't be able to recognize the pain unless you've experienced it.
Okay.
Because you wouldn't know what pain was. So ultimately, what you saw in that animal was a projection of yourself. It's not to say that it's not to say that the pain isn't real. It is real. To the contrary, it is real. You're right. But what's really real about it?
But what's the implication of it for your whole scheme if the dog has no self and yet the dog's in great pain?
Of course the dog.
Does the dog have a self? If it doesn't, then it can't be in pain according to you.
Of course it has a self.
The dog has a self. The dog has a self, of course, but the dog does not have a consciousness of itself. It's very different.
Okay.
So obviously the self, because you're right, we're talking about it. The self can experience all these things. So obviously the dog, having a self, can also experience. What the dog can't experience is, I'm having an experience of experiencing all these things.
Right.
Right. That's a huge difference.
Yeah, it doesn't have self-reflective experience.
Right. That's a
Sure.
huge difference.
Of course.
It could also be an artificial distinction.
We don't know what the dog
Because
thinks.
dogs, in a sense, also have identity.
They have a self.
exhibit characteristics.
I understand.
Of
I
being
understand.
able to take identity seriously.
Okay.
It's
They
a
have outcasts
Sure.
and their little groups and they have fights.
Yeah,
They're sociable. They're very sociable
Yeah.
animals.
We have a lot more to learn about animal cognition.
And it's, but it's,
They don't have
We have a lot more to
But
learn
it's
about animal
instinctual.
cognition.
It's
I
instinctual.
mean,
They don't.
say is
They don't have DOS.
language has its factors. Starting the kid
I just wanted
starting.
the position of work in this whole
Talmud
the
is the song.
fifth commandment, you are to work and to work 6 days a week, and you're supposed to rest on the seventh day. So there is a positive commandment to work. Is that right?
You're supposed to work at what?
At anything.
No, this is wrong.
No, you choose what you have to do.
No, no,
Your
it's wrong. It's
profession.
incorrect.
Okay.
That's where it's incorrect. You're supposed to work at developing a second nature called loving your fellow as yourself.
Yeah, I know, but
No, that's
to
actually
exist-
what you're supposed to work at.
To exist, we have to work. To exist.
No, actually it's wrong. If everybody, if you have a collective of people who have reached a consciousness level called loving your fellow as yourself, it means that you don't have to work because they'll be taking care of you.
The society as a whole, I may not have to work. I'll confess, I'm not a workaholic. Right? Society as a whole has to have individuals that
She's
are
actually the hero
producing.
in this story here.
No,
Society to be able
I
to
would
survive.
say it. I would say it differently. No, I would say it differently.
Shows up 500 years
One
ago,
of the
and he looks in the
basic
garden,
principles,
and he says, "Wow, nice real estate."
as I mentioned earlier, is that the Baal Salam recommends that anything that is not empirically viable
He's the exploiter of the garden.
should be discarded
Watches
in one's
everything.
understanding of the
He
wisdom.
bars himself from action because he gave man
And that
free
all
will.
the laws
So this guy turns it,
that
divides
we
the people
find in
into
the Torah are
tendencies,
actually rooted
turns them into slaves,
in the natural
puts them
world.
slave block. These are transatlantic
Natural
steamers,
world.
and they're filling it with
Why?
black gold, which is
Because we see in nature that there's a law of complete interdependence.
and this is a two-headed
It's
monster
maximum sharing. There is nothing wasted in nature. It's impossible by definition.
This is what I was showing him. This.
So the question becomes, work at what? In nature, everything works. But what it doesn't do is nothing in nature works with an awareness for its own profit. To the contrary, what drives it is a behavior of interdependence, which means that it works to give.
Work is interdependence.
No, hold on a minute. And what I just explained is actually the basis of society. You see, we're so egocentric that we actually believe that society is a human construction. It is not. Society is a condition of sharing that we find in all dimensions of creation. We have society of cells, society of organisms, right? All the way down. Society of subatomic harmony, exactly. Until finally we understand that society is actually a concept of the expression of the individual in collaboration with individual in order to create the whole. And this is actually the key to the holographic architecture of creation. So when we talk about work, we have to talk about, the function of actions according to the final purpose, right? So we can't really on that basis consider what most people do for work as something that's part of what I just explained.
I agree with you that we need to connect with others to be happy. We we
No,
need,
actually, we need to connect with others to exist.
right, okay, to exist, we need to connect with them. I think we also need to be active, period. We need to paint.
No, we have no choice but to be
Right,
active
okay,
because we're driven by our desires.
Yes, but
Right.
no.
Yes.
Yeah, but let's say you're a painter. You are driven to paint, you have to paint. You're a scientist, you have to go to the lab. And if you're a writer, you have to write. You may be a farmer. You may or may not get satisfied. But I think there's a necessity to work in each human being. And work, I'm using a very broad term. Work means activity.
Right. No, I would say that there's a necessity for action. Yes,
Right,
absolutely.
activity which includes producing something.
I would agree with that.
Okay,
I
so
would agree with that.
I think we have to look at that. I mean, we spend a third of our day doing that. And I think it's important to have work that is fulfilling, not necessarily fulfilling, but that you're doing something for society as a whole.
Yeah, no, I would say, I would completely agree, and I would say, I would go a step further and say it's necessary to have work that's fulfilling. And now I would say how you can do that.
Any work.
Because obviously we need garbage men.
Right, no,
Right,
any
and
work
all
that
these
is,
other things
yeah.
that most people don't find so
No,
fulfilling.
but you talked about cleaning the sand and the beach. That's work.
Okay.
You found it somehow fulfilling at some point. Even
Right.
the trashman may say,
Exactly.
okay, well, I did a good job today. I'm happy.
Exactly. So basically, I guess what you're saying is that it's a consciousness issue.
It's a conscious, even if it's not a conscious issue, I think we have to work.
Well, we have to take actions.
To support ourselves and to support society. I think we have to do that. I mean, obviously some people cannot do it, but in general, we have to do it. What?
And some people are artists.
Fine, that's also work. Intellectual work is work.
Like you.
No, I would say that. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I think that we have. I would just put it a little differently.
There is a
I would say
commandment,
we
there's a
have
fifth
to
commandment.
take actions.
Okay.
We are compelled to take actions
What's the fifth commandment?
because our
What is the fifth
essential.
commandment, you tell me? What is it? You shall work 6 days a week. Is that doesn't it say to work? You should do all the work.
But that's not a
You should do all the work.
And you should not work the
No.
7 days.
What does it say?
That's the man. The man is not you should work the 6 days.
No.
There's 6
What
days
does
you
it
may
say?
work.
What is the exact wording of the sixth commandment?
6
The
days
fifth-
You may work.
You may work.
You may work.
May or have to?
No, you may.
May.
It doesn't say may in the Hebrew. Does it say may in Hebrew?
He's right. It says
It doesn't say may.
Yeah, but that's
We
like
translate it as may. It doesn't say may.
Yeah, but technically it's
translated
about
May. It's
shop.
written
What?
such a way.
It's
Right.
indisputable, but
It's written on that way.
We interpret it that way.
It doesn't matter. The point is well taken.
No, but you're right.
The point is well taken.
no way.
It's we definitely live in the world of action, and we're compelled to take actions by our desires.
We're compelled
All
also
actions.
to survive. We have to survive.
Surviving
Survive
is
with food, etc. We
it's
have-
all desire.
You don't think it's a physical? It's a necessity
Yeah,
beyond desire.
I think you have a very intense desire to survive. I would agree. Don't you? Don't you?
No, that's part of your desire, but I think you need to. Okay.
There is
you
nothing.
claim it's a desire, but I feel it's a necessity to exist, is to produce and to work, whether you like it or not.
If I look at it on
It says
the
also
most
in
basic
Torah,
cellular level,
The Jews came out
the
of
cell wants to survive.
Okay.
It has a desire. It has a
Yeah, but
desire
there's also-
for.
Yeah, but there's also an objective need, an objective situation there.
I don't
that
agree
you don't
with that.
change. I mean, there's an objective situation. You have to have wheat to eat, and the field has to
See,
be
there's-
sowed, and it has to be
I agree with
cultivated.
everything you're saying except that when you get to objective. For me, there's no objective.
Okay.
I don't see where objective comes into it. It's completely
Okay,
everything you're
there's a lot
saying.
of philosophy that there is an objective world outside of
I completely disagree. I would have to take great issue with that.
Is that objectively true, you're saying?
What?
Is what you're saying objectively true? That there's no objective?
No. To the contrary. I would say the only thing is subjective.
So that means what you're saying is subjective too?
Absolutely.
And you don't feel that this contradicts your whole position again?
Not at all. And I can explain why that is.
Why is that?
Because my subjective experience is the only experience I have. The issue is how that's now including you. In other words, I can't say you don't exist. You're just part of my dream. Now the question is, how am I going to dream? Because I'm here as a dreamer. Right, so that's the point. I can dream a dream that's a much better reality than this. That dream is dependent on my ability to act like, as much as I can, like being, which only has one expression, which is given.
How would you distinguish your view from what's called solipsism? Solipsism is the idea that nothing exists outside of my consciousness. How does your view differ from that?
Well, I can't comment on that because I don't know. What's the name of it?
Solipsism.
Solipsism.
Label doesn't matter. I mean, how do you escape? Because I want to hear.
I don't have enough information to comment on that. So, you know.
I'm speaking English. I mean,
no, I don't know anything about that philosophy, so I'm not going to
I just
comment.
said the idea that nothing exists outside of your consciousness. How does that fit into your? How does your position differ from that idea? Label's not important.
Not that nothing exists outside his consciousness. It's that the outside existence is becoming alive through his consciousness. It's not alive until his consciousness is there. If his consciousness is not there, it's not there. Once his consciousness is there, it exists outside somehow. But
that's how I would answer it. But it's a very in all fairness, it's a very slippery slope. Because we have to, in order to really talk about it, we have to go into a lot of nuances. Because you're right, you're picking up on nuances here that are crucial. Because again, one of the great problems in discussing these things is that we're always dealing with different dimensions of the issue.
Let me just say, I'm just letting you know the position you've been presenting, even if with your qualified way saying, this has led to a lot of dead ends in the history of ideas. In regards to what, no, not just to me.
No, actually, I would have to argue. No, actually, I would have to argue that I could never agree with that.
Okay.
Because actually, what I'm presenting to you, in many ways, is radically different than its previous ideas. Because, you see, I guess, I'm not discussing philosophy tonight.
You know what? You are, and it's
no. Actually, let's put it. I think in a.
It's not important what it's called philosophy, not. Everything you gave presented tonight, it's not an insult to you or anything. I've heard it before. I mean, it's not an insult to you. It's not against what you're saying.
I understand.
I'm just saying
He was not dealing with epistemological nuance. That was not the purpose of the talk. Solipsism and the questions regarding it are epistemological issues. His conversation had a different dimension, and he was not focused on satisfying someone who comes from an epistemological perspective and knows the nuances as it relates, the implications of what he says as it relates to that field. It wasn't his purpose.
Well, I do want to say something that what I was talking about tonight was not philosophy. And the distinction is important, I might add, because what I'm talking about is a spiritual system of inner development. Philosophy comes from the outside. It's a collective. Okay? What I'm talking about is an inside thing. Now, by the way, I don't expect many people to relate or understand what I just said, because in order to do so, ultimately, what I'm talking about is experiential. It's not intellectual. And I understand, by the way, the paradox there. Of course, I'm keenly aware of it. There is no way to approach what I'm talking about without beginning on the platform of egotism. So yes, you're absolutely correct. I am participating egoically this evening in order to share something with yourselves. Okay? My hope is, which is where I began the evening, is that I may awaken in you a desire, okay, to have an experiential situation develop according to wherever you're at in your practice. Because I'm not here to convert anybody or anything. I came simply to share what had happened to me. And I think that, by the way, your reaction to it's very consistent in terms of, and by the way, beautiful, in terms of who you are and where you're coming from. And you know, something that I would just like to finish, I just want to point one other thing out, is that when we talk about being, you know, there's a very beautiful aspect of that I just like to point out, which is that, you know, each of us is having our own experience, you know. And as I said before, you know, that's not the truth. It's our own experience, right? So, but we also have, in addition to all of us here having our own experience, we have another experience, all of us, which is all of us here, right? And that all of us here part, which includes all the disagreements, all the different language, all the different consciousness, all the different stuff, that actually is the road to be.
If you don't mind, just one last thing, because I loved your talk from beginning to end. I just want to say that when I have a conversation with people with the exact opposite perspective that you have, the exact opposite, they also, and I, whatever, I'm just irritating, I point holes in what they're saying, or I try to, whatever.
Yeah.
And always, invariably, they resort to the same thing, that I'm lacking experience, I'm coming too much.
But I didn't
please,
say that.
please.
I said you're lacking experience.
Gotcha, no, but the point is, they appeal ultimately to the very same ground that you do, and yet draw the exact opposite philosophy.
It's fine.
I'd like.
It's also part of being, isn't it? Being isn't subjective, it's all inclusive.
So I read a book. You read the Torah. I was painting and I was reading, using Asian calligraphy. So I pick up this book and it says, to understand Chinese Asian calligraphy, you have to understand the Asian mind. But to understand the Asian mind, you have to understand the Western mind. And to understand the Western mind, we look at the world as if there's something outside of us that will make us complete, that will fill us, that will, you know, whether it be love, a car, religion, something outside of us. Whereas the Asian mind looks at life as if you're born already complete and full. And the idea is to live within that being, that completeness, that fullness, and to live long and well and healthy. And when I heard your talk, I kept on thinking of that, you know, with the ego concept of we're always looking for something outside of us to fill us. And yet I kept on thinking of maybe we're already full. We just don't know it.
We are, which is why, I mean, one example of that is so many times when I was learning with the Rav.
Which Rav?
Bram one. You know, I would just get overwhelmed. You know, we'd be learning, and first of all, I wouldn't be understanding anything. And that's very, you know.
That's because you.
I mean, I understand it.
You're looking for something
not
outside
understanding
yourself.
anything. And I would say to him, I don't understand a thing we're talking about here. And he would say to me, it's all right, let's keep learning. Which seemed like madness to me. We keep learning what? I didn't understand 12 sentences ago. But you're building this whole construction on what I didn't understand. You know, so now I really don't understand.
Right. But
and he would say to me, it's all right, keep going, you're going to understand.
That's why he sent you out to sweep the world.
You're going to understand.
Well,
what happens is, actually, is that you go to bed.
You realize it's all ridiculous.
No, and you wake up at some point. Sometimes it's the next morning, sometimes it's a week, and suddenly you understand. And there's no logical, apparent reason why you understand, except that obviously the wisdom would have no value as an inner spiritual practice if it didn't come out of you. So actually, you know it all. And if you read, for example, Talmud Sefarot, which is the Baal Salam's one of his works concerning the Ari, where he takes passages from the Esayim and explains them, is that you understand very quickly with that study, already when you get to the end of section 1 of the Ari, that the entire conversation, which is extremely esoteric, it's about lines and circles and dots and desires and all kinds of sephirot and all kinds of stuff, that actually the whole conversation is actually about the condition before birth, the transformation during birth, and then what the consciousness starting point is in a lifetime. The whole conversation starts as an all-inclusive condition, and we see this in even the development of the baby. The development of the baby actually is a replay of the entire development of life on the planet, literally, starting with a single cell and then fish and everything, and you see the fetus becomes all the different things that are wound up in that. So it's really also an all-inclusive reflection.
The only issue I have with that is what a friend of mine who I've been doing a project on called Madness in God is spiritual pride. Knowledge, thinking we know something, and because we think we know something, that essence of it actually becomes the obstacle course that we have to get around. So you gather all of this information, you give this talk, and maybe in giving the talk, you should go out and sweep the beaches.
I couldn't agree
because
more.
the zen-ness of sweeping the ridiculous.
Right. No, I hope that you heard me say.
Right.
One will not get to what I'm inferring through this talk or through a study. Now, it will help, by the way, for sure. Because when we have a sense, what is sure is, in my case, for example. So what did the learning do for me? It changed my consciousness.
How many years do you study?
8 years. I'm studying with the Rav. I have more than 2,000 hours.
He's old though, no?
Huh?
He's old.
Not so old.
Mid-60s.
The son. No, he's the son of the assistant to the Baal Salam.
The way I see it is your talk might not be valid for certain people at this time. And maybe in a year from now they will get something from it.
That's right.
The other thing is it's often the case that the truth, whatever the truth is between the lines. It's not what is said or what is known or what is an experience.
I was just discussing this with the Rav because one of the things that has been lost in general and in the keeping of the garment of the Torah is certain aspects of the practice. Torah is a practice, by the way. So if you're not practicing it, you will not understand it, for sure. So part of the practice, for example, simple practice, give a simple practice, is, as I alluded to earlier this evening, is mindfulness. Saying a bracha, for example, just before you have a glass of water, just running off a bracha, don't say it, because it's a waste of time. It's not the bracha. The bracha requires a few seconds of mindfulness, where it's not a bracha.
No, but halachically, if you just say it without any mindfulness, it's still better than not saying it, because it gets into. Because
you still have the split conscious of doing it.
Actually, I must. I realize that that's what's taught. it's again a much more complicated issue than that. Depends. In other words, very nice to meet you. Thank you for coming.
Good night.
In other words, actually, we have empirical evidence that just doing it with the wrong consciousness, it won't help you, and it may not go into you.
Well,
and
wrong
to the contrary, it may actually create evil. Because what can very often happen is that a person can have a practice of mitzvot, right, without knowing, which is why it's so crucial to understand that the guiding principle of the Torah is to develop a second nature of loving your fellow as yourself, and all the other mitzvot are targeted at achieving that, okay? Without that knowledge, God forbid, a person can have a practice of mitzvot which actually leads to the expansion of egotism, because they believe that, first of all, they want to do it. Second of all, they believe that now they're mastering doing it, and then so on and so forth. Okay, right, exactly. And we have many, many, many examples of this. Unfortunately, we have more examples of this than we do of the other.
But because only a few individuals can live with a mindfulness, the halacha dictates that you do it anyway.
No, that's
because
not,
most people can't.
That's not true.
Can't practice it in the proper way anyway.
I would.
It's inherently a minority position.
I would disagree with that. I would have to disagree with that. I would say inherently it's a human condition, and everybody can practice it. And it's not the fault, by the way, of in my experience, it's not the fault of most individuals. It's the fault that they just don't know. I mean, the things we're talking about tonight, essentially...
They don't know because it hasn't been allotted to them.
Exactly. They don't know because it hasn't been available to them.
No, it hasn't been their lot in life.
What do you mean?
It means that you take it for granted, like the things that you talk about represent some sort of existential luxury, and by definition, that's a minority object.
Well, I would disagree with that.
No, I just want
As
to
a matter of fact, I would say that in many respects, a humbler life or a disadvantaged life.
I don't mean luxury materially at all. Yeah. I mean spiritually. Therefore, I don't mean you need to be wealthy to attain it. That's not what I mean.
No, I didn't believe that's what you meant. But since you're qualifying it, what exactly do you mean in terms of spiritual luxury?
I mean that what you're talking about is you're laying down a certain sort of language which is associated with the spiritual development.
Right, that's true.
Now, a preoccupation with the spiritual development is not something that can happen collectively.
Why not?
That's just how this world is.
Well, we're doing it right now.
Okay. I'm just saying that
it is harder to do it collectively than do it by yourself.
No, it's impossible to do it collectively. You do it individually, and the result is collectively.
Exactly.
Right. You can't do it collectively.
But it just seems like it never comes to be.
It never comes to be because people are too selfish. It's really simple.
You know, I just want to say one thing. I got to run, but I'm a Catholic, right? I'm left-wing Vatican II Catholic, and today I discovered that I'm Jewish. And I'm not asking permission. I just joined when I heard this guy tonight, and I've never heard any other Jew anywhere besides Jesus Christ that convinced me that I'm Jewish. By his definition, I'm a Jew. And I'm also, I'm a left-wing Vatican II Catholic, and most Catholics, I'm just telling you, most Catholics, they have no idea what I just said. And I don't care how many years they went to school, and some of them went to college, they still don't know what I just said. Because in my church, there is a war going on between those of us who are Vatican II, and we are repressed, and our knowledge is repressed, and the other guys, the Pope and the last two popes who have been up there, they do not want the rest of the Catholics to know about this, and there are very good reasons why. Because this is a war we're talking about, theological war. And my position, like Vatican II Catholics, we say in Vatican II, and the reason the Pope was killed, he was murdered the Pope. He was strangled to death, and they said he had a heart attack in 1968. And the reason he was killed is because the change, the theological change, is so grand. It is so big. It is revolution. And you have to understand what's involved in this, and how much money and power, territory and resources go into theology. This is not a small matter. This is not about God and angels. This is about men and real estate and power. And so what you just said, and today, what I heard you say, and I understood what you said, it is revolutionary, and if you understand it, it has impact in the world, and if you implement it, it would change the world. And that's the same thing that happened at Vatican II, and in Vatican II they came out with a new statement on salvation. When I was a kid, all of you were going to hell. Everybody who wasn't a Catholic was going to hell. And I, as a kid, realized intuitively this was wrong. It is just absolutely stupid. And so all I'm saying is that theology makes a difference. And in Vatican II, they came out and they said salvation is a state of grace attainable by no deed or act or association. And they said salvation can be, God chooses who he wills, and you don't have to be a Christian, you could be a Jew, a Muslim, a Hindu, and even an atheist, and you can still qualify, no problem. And that's revolutionary. I told my other Christian friends that, and they say that's heresy. You should be killed for that. That's blasphemy. This is oh, he's a bad guy. Pope Benedict he's fighting that war, and we're on the losing side. Those guys are dangerous and reactionary. Even the new stuff they just came out with and the change in language, it's bad. And so all I'm saying is, ideas, they're meaningful,
I'm not arguing the existence of suffering in the world. Of course it exists.
And you know what? Oh yeah, I want a recording too, and I know how to get in.
That's what you think. I changed my number.
Hey, this is for you. This is my blog. So you can have his opinion and his blog, but my mother doesn't like it. That one is a much more conservative one. Yeah, the difference is the other one, that his blog, I tell too much of the truth, so it's dangerous.
It's a sort of dramatic.
It's not a problem. This is how God wants it.
I'm going to take off myself.
Wednesday.
Somewhere more about this. I have no
Do you want me to write it down?
I believe that. I understand exactly what to do. You tell me, and I'll tell you what it is to do, and why I'm more Jewish than you are.
Explain why you're more Jewish than I am.
I'll tell you why.
Please explain why.
Because Jew is one who gives praise to God.
I don't doubt.
So what I'm saying is actually what I'm saying to you is that with that statement, we can transform the world.
My experience.
The problem is that there aren't enough people willing to put their arm around. And this is the purpose of the suffering. The suffering itself brings
I see.
And the difference is
for sharing intimacy. Actually, more than that, the ultimate spiritual fact is vulnerability.
After my dad died,
Vulnerability is where we can most easily
so I found this collection, amazing
vulnerability is a condition that allows
a lot
for
of the
intimacy.
designers and painters
The word intimacy
worked
means
for
that
my
we come
parents
close
when
together.
they were young, became painters.
That's why it's a better
So you see, what I am saying is, as I have warned the
I just find that
that
insufferably
yes,
arrogant.
we're going to do this together.
No, it's so
It's an egoic exercise.
I find that
I'm participating, but if somehow I have succeeded in awakening the spark in your heart that allows you now to begin a journey which is already in you towards the development of a second nature,
No, I don't.
passion,
all
of
the right
giving,
literature,
that
but
is
you don't have
successful
the
is
experience.
how
And that's the
much
one area
But
where
anyway,
it's
so the show is
Which language was he studying in?
Yeah, and it's an exhibit of this particular part of the state that is the Greek art. But it's
Well
going to
enough.
be a really good crowd.
Here he just gave a lecture at
I've
the
said this before in the past.
The John
To me, this is just
Anyway, I have to go.
as well as the Arab.
Michael,
Sorry, everything you're saying.
Okay, one second. Let him answer.
when
We're
it
waiting.
comes, when it comes to Kabbalah, it's based on the Zohar and the Ariya Kadosh, and who else?
Oh, that's a huge tradition.
No, I don't.
Huge tradition.
No, I don't.
And also on a lot of Talmud.
Looks like a rabbi.
There's a lot of talk.
In some way you can say you can
Gotcha,
start from
gotcha.
Clarice and you'll be
But there's no point arguing with
It's
you.
recommended.
I will always
Yeah, of course, for you. Yeah.
I'm learning now Dari for 15 years.
So there's nothing. I have to be
Oh, you
wrong.
know a lot of
I have to be wrong.
No, I'm not to
Yeah.
learn Dari and I'm like,
Yeah.
So basically now it's a fashion. A lot of people are studying the Kabbalah, even
Gotcha.
Christians, whatever. But what is the essence?
Most of
What
the
is it
Kabbalah
about?
that's being studied, just for clarity, is not the Kabbalah.
Gotcha.
well, those are
Okay, the Kabbalah
Right.
is
Yes, I've
basically
heard
the
it
study
before. I know these philosophies.
of the laws of
Yes, I
receiving
meditate. I've done
and,
it.
and desire,
Yes, I have.
which is
I've done
receiving
it.
and desire,
I've done it.
which
I
is
do
the
it. I do it.
existential condition of every human being.
What would you say before desire?
Receiving.
Before to get back.
The will to receive and desire
You
are
should look him up.
interchangeable.
La Formula.
He's a prolific poet from the 50s and 60s and a novelist and a mystic.
That's a good idea.
Zipper, Lionel
You were sort of
Zipper.
suggesting that receiving to give is.
There are four.
Or maybe I misunderstood.
No. What I was.
It's a drawing
It's a
of
good
him.
question.
Gotcha.
It's a detail.
Yeah.
Well, not for my general
Yeah, it is.
presentation. In
I will.
detail,
I'll send you
there
an
are
email.
four
I'll send
levels.
you his name
Right,
and
desire. Each one of them
tonight or tomorrow.
is unique
Yeah, it would be
as
great.
one
I'm
develops
a
through the four
My
conditions.
daughter's a photographer.
The ultimate condition,
And
without getting hung up on
of
the
course to
verb,
have you there,
because
but also
already
to record
it's very
your lessons
problematic.
over there.
The ultimate condition
I just find
is to receive in order to
No, not
because
this
there is no, you
Another
understand,
time.
there is no
and it's lacking.
I don't
annihilation
keep
of
it anymore.
self.
My daughter became a
annihilation
house
of self
photographer.
would mean
She's
it wouldn't exist.
22. She
The
graduated
self
college.
is by definition
I
the
was a
receiver.
photographer for most of half her life, and then I went into design.
Better than receiving without.
No, no, it's not the goal.
to give, it says receiving to give.
And now
It
she's
so much.
We will.
even
I
better
give to you very
than
often.
receiving clothing.
God
and
wants
fashion.
I know I'll see you here again somehow.
Because God is the ultimate. He created.
Yeah, I know Cassie very
Take some,
well.
That's why
steal some of her.
But it's hard to
automatically.
No, I understand what you said.
I have a
Automatically.
I have 3,000 pairs of shoes.
I agree. Right back at you. Right back at you. Right back at you. I think you're not being true. That's why you buy these ideologies. No.
very important.
That's pretty amazing. Here's a,
But I gotta use the bathroom. God bless you. The rest. All right.
really? That's the
Bottom
invitation.
line is, where's the pleasure coming?
That's my parents.
Above.
The origin of pleasure.
In a person. So you understand, in an undeveloped state, the source of pleasure.
What is your name again?
Gio.
Zia.
Zia.
What I'm suggesting to you
I better